You may open the doors, for sure. First one in. First one in. Matters of privilege and recognition of guests, the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back to my colleagues for another week of important debate here in the provincial legislature. It's a different configurement in here today. We'll get used to that. It's nice to have our media friends in the gallery itself, and also our public gallery is now open, Mr. Speaker, although it's less than brisk turnout than what we might have expected here, but it is nice and another show that we're moving forward. Let me be the first to recognize in the public gallery, Mr. Speaker, my friend and the soon-to-be official candidate or member of the Legislative Assembly for Cornwall Meadowbank, Mr. Mark McLean, who was successful in last night's by-election in District 16. I've known Mark for a long time. He's a tremendous individual, Mr. Speaker, and he will bring a great perspective into this legislature and will do a great job representing the residents of District 16, Cornwall Meadowbank. I also want to take this time to thank Jane McIsaac, Todd McLean, and Larry Hale as candidates in the election, as well as their respective teams, Mr. Speaker. Politics is alive and well in PEI and certainly in Cornwall Meadowbank. We've all been through this who sit in these chairs, who are privileged to be here. Politics is a give and take business when it comes to getting elected, and it's difficult that only one could be victorious. There were 4 terrific candidates out there, and I think Cornwall Meadowbank and PEI in general are the better for their candidacies, Mr. Speaker, and I wish Mark success in the future. In keeping with that, Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to offer my congratulations to Laurie Mckay, who's the new president of the PEI NDP party, taking over from Jason Aylward, Mr. Speaker. I think we all agree in here that democracy works best when the voices of all are heard. And I want to thank Jason for his service, and I look forward to having Laurie play an important role as well. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to recognize a person who's become a friend of mine over the last couple of years. Officially retiring today from the National Hockey League is Dion Fanoff, who's no stranger to PEI. He hasn't played for a couple of seasons, but his announcement of retirement is official today, having played 1,048 NHL games. He's a 3-time All-Star. He and his wife, actress Alicia Cuthbert, are residents of Prince Edward Island for about 6 or 7 months, Mr. Speaker. He's known very far and wide for his tremendous charity work and advocacy, particularly for Special Olympics, both Dion and Alicia. So I just wanted to wish him well in whatever comes next, and I really look forward to executing on our long-planned visit to his home in New London, Mr. Speaker, to have a discussion about hockey, politics, and whatever else. And just finally, Mr. Speaker, doesn't seem that far away, 2022, hard to believe as it is, but I was excited to see the announcement of the Confederation Centre of the Arts 2022 season, Mr. Speaker, which will feature Telltale Harbour, starring Alan Doyle of Great Big Sea fame. It's based on the wonderful play and movie, The Grand Seduction. It will go on sale. Tickets will go on sale Thursday, Mr. Speaker. It should be an exciting summer, and I believe we've already talked in here about the return of Anne of Green Gables, the musical, which is fantastic. Next Wednesday, we'll be seeing what the Guild will launch for their 2022 season, Mr. Speaker, and just to show that things are moving back to normal, it was lovely to see Swoop Airlines announce they're starting a service in June of a twice-weekly flight to Edmonton, Mr. Speaker. So 2022 looks ever so promising, although we don't want to wish time away in here. It's going to be an exciting 2022, and I invite ask all Islanders here to enjoy the proceedings here today, and once again, welcome, Mark.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and it is great to be back this week after a week off and to be back in familiar surroundings. But it's, you know, honestly, it's amazing how accustomed you become to something different. And this looks very strange, very welcome, but very strange after so many sittings in this House with limited capacity, with people sitting far apart, not being able to see each other. So this is, it's lovely to return to some kind of normal. I'm going to follow up on the Premier's remarks, as I often do, and congratulate Adam Brazier and Steve Bellamy on the announcement of their new season. And I'm particularly looking forward to hearing and seeing Telltale Harbour, based on the Grand Seduction, as the Premier said. And I would like to congratulate Mark McLean on winning the Grand Seduction in District 16. It was a great campaign, and as the Premier said, we had 4 really strong candidates. And I also want to recognise the other candidates, Larry. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Larry Hale, and of course Todd McLean and Jane McIsaac. And I spent a lot of time in that district, and I know how engaged the people were. I was sorry to see that the turnout was not higher than it was, but it was a clear result, and I want to give my personal congratulations to Mark, and I look forward to seeing you here within the rail here in the legislature. I don't know what everybody else does on a Sunday night, but I've taken to watching the Great Canadian Baking Show, and we have a fantastic island representative there. Her name is Amanda Muirhead, and she lives in Westmoreland, and she is doing the island proud. I think we're on week 6 of the competition now, and Amanda is still there, still standing, and she's done some amazing stuff. You know, she did a cake shaped like PEI. She did a fries with the works pie on Sunday night, and she's really bringing a taste, literally a taste of the island to that national competition. So I want to congratulate Amanda for what she's doing and wish her well in the weeks to come. And I look forward to today. This is going to be a big day in this House in terms of legislation, and I look forward to that and to the debates that will fill out this week. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You seem like you're a long ways away. It's great to be back. It's always a pleasure to be back in the legislature, and I welcome my colleagues back. Special welcome to the media in the media gallery. It's nice to see you back, and a special welcome to the public. It's wonderful. Mr. Speaker, the past few days have been very tragic here on PEI, as we lost 5 people in accidents across this province. The losses span generations and communities, and I would like to give condolences to the families and loved ones of those who lost their lives. The whole island is standing with you at this time. A special heartfelt condolences to the McNeil family of Richmond on the loss of their daughter and their granddaughter. My heart goes out to them. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to congratulate Mark McLean on winning the Cornwall Meadowbank by-election last night. You certainly have big shoes to fill. I would also like to thank and congratulate Jane McIsaac, Larry Hale, and Todd McLean for putting their names forward. Finally, I want to congratulate Jane McIsaac on running a strong campaign on her own merit and putting her name forward to run for office. While we may not have gotten the results we had hoped for, Jane showed her true commitment to people in public service, and I hope this isn't the last we see of her in island politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Certainly a pleasure for me to rise in the House again today as well, and to bring greetings to those who've joined us in the gallery as well as the media, and congratulate, of course, Mark McLean on his great victory last night, but also congratulations to everyone that was involved in the democratic process. Well done to all. Mr. Speaker, I also want to send out a special hello to my mother-in-law, Doreen McPhee, who watches every day that this was in. She had a hard time coping last week when we were in a planning week and we weren't in here, so I think she watched some reruns, and that's how desperate she is for entertainment. Mr. Speaker, there's a significant event coming up this coming Saturday in the Strafford area, and that would be the Strafford Area Food Drive. It's being held on Saturday, November the 20th from 9 a.m. until 2 p.m. It's a little different than most years where it's a drop-off food drive, and there's 4 locations that will be receiving donations of non-perishable goods and monetary donations as well. That would be Our Lady of Assumption Parish, Strafford Town Hall, Sobeys, and No Frills. And for those residents in the area that happen to reside in one of the various, I think, approximately 60 apartment buildings, nothing has changed. The boxes are already in your foyers and your lobbies, and the volunteers will come around Saturday morning and pick those up. Mr. Speaker, as well, I just want to follow up on what the Leader of the Third Party had to say with regards to the extremely tragic events over the weekend and yesterday here on PEI. And my extreme condolences and thoughts and prayers go out to the family and friends of all those impacted by these incredible tragedies. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want to extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to the first responders that were responding to these tragedies. And, Mr. Speaker, that, of course, would include staff from my department, the Department of Transportation, the highway crews. And I know I've had conversations with the Minister of Justice, and we're there. We have programs in place to support first responders. And if anyone that is having a difficult time from what they experienced, please reach out. There's people there to help you, and we care about you, and you're in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today, and of course, welcome everyone watching from District 18, Rustico Emerald. Mr. Speaker, and possibly from outside of Prince Edward Island, now that we're streamed live on the internet, of course. And Mr. Speaker, in the gallery today, as it happens, today, the first day the public gallery has been open for a long time, I have two very special guests visiting from Ontario, and that's Linda and Ron Trivers. My parents, their first time ever here in the PEI Legislative Assembly. You know, Mr. Speaker, when we get into politics, really, and it's been my goal always, is first and foremost to help and to serve people. And Mr. Speaker, I like to think that I get that direction and that drive to serve community from my parents. So thank you, parents, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise today in this new setting that we are, or I guess old. Everything old is made new again today. I want to acknowledge Toby McDonald, who's here in the gallery today. And it's, first of all, it's wonderful to be able to acknowledge a constituent here in the gallery. In particular, that it's Toby, who is a fantastic advocate, as we all know, for children and youth on Prince Edward Island. So welcome, Toby, and welcome to all those who are here in the gallery today, and to the media as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid, Strafford, and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure to rise today. Hi to everybody watching from Mermaid, Strafford. Again, I'd also like to reiterate what the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure said about the food drive on Saturday for the Strafford area, and there's several pickup locations, and one pickup location is the No Frills just across the bridge. And I'd just like to say hi to Mike and Andrea O'Connor, who are the new owners of the No Frills, and they had a pretty exciting opening and celebration on the weekend, and lots of people went in to show their support to them. And I guess they just had lineups and tons of people going in. It's just great to see people supporting local businesses. And I'd also, big news, Strafford Area Lions Club is having their first crib night this Thursday in like 2 years, which is huge news and pretty exciting. And they're looking forward to opening the doors at this Cotton Center and welcoming everybody back in. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to play crib. You're welcome to be my partner. And anyway, so it's pretty exciting for them. They've been, asking, and they got the go-ahead yesterday. So I'm pretty excited for them. Everybody's welcome. Of course, Vax Pass and masks will be required in order for them to hold the event. And it's just great to be able to see those service organizations getting back to what they love to do. And anyway, I look forward to some crib on Thursday night. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, welcome to press and visitors now able to be in the room. I don't know how the other members do it, but I am unfortunately not able to recognize anyone wearing a mask. So if you want to be recognized, please send me an email in advance. Also, a shout out to all those people who protect our borders. Hi, in particular, to my friend Kim Madigan, who works at Wood Islands, and with the many hundreds of people who test everyone entering PEI. Thank you for your work. And it looks like it's going to get colder by the day. I recently enjoyed a trip off island for the first time in 2 years to New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario. Of course, masks and vax passes were required everywhere, but borders could be crossed freely. It was, of course, totally different when we returned via Borden, where we were met with a forest of tents and an army of people asking questions and testing. It was, in fact, the first time I had the experience of a stick up both my nostrils, and while that wasn't a pleasure, I was certainly really pleased to have a negative result. Let's remember that our island's enviable record of stopping the COVID virus cold at the border is precisely why we islanders can relax here at home on the island itself. In fact, countries like UK and Denmark, with no border controls and few restrictions, now have the island equivalent of 100 new COVID cases a day, albeit with a few deaths, unless you're unvaccinated. So let's keep up the guard up with the first line of defense, and thanks again to our Army of Border Guards. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty, and the third-party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great privilege to rise and say hello to everybody in District 14, and wish them well. And want to say hello to the gallery, especially Mark. Congratulations on your victory, and congratulations to all the other candidates for doing so well out there. The After School Association of PEI just formed their association. They recently had their first conference for PD Day, so I had a chance to spend a little bit of time with them, and just a wonderful group that we need to look at a little bit more. It's an after-school group. They do a great job, so congratulations, Michelle Brown, in organizing a fantastic day. And Mr. Speaker, in sporting events, you don't often get them to stop without a whistle or something going on. Well, the UPI Panthers, that happened twice, and it was to acknowledge accomplishments of two individual players that they stopped the game that was so significant. So Carolina Del Santos set the all-time record for the University of Prince Edward Island for reboundings at 848, and they stopped the game for that to acknowledge her accomplishment, as well as Jenna May Ellsworth, who lives not a kilometer from here, grew up in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and she set the all-time mark for the University of Panthers women, scoring-wise at 1,359 points for her career, and she's still got 15 games to go. These are massive accomplishments, and I wanted to acknowledge and send a shout-out to both of those incredible players. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I want to rise and wish happy 25th birthday to Brandon Holmes, who is home watching legislature today, as he does most days. Anybody that knows Brandon at all knows he loves politics, he loves hockey, and he loves fishing. So on behalf of everybody in the PEI legislature, we wish you a happy 25th birthday, Brandon.
I miss anyone? Member statement. The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently I've heard from Islanders, business owners, event organizers, and customers raising suspicion and concern about the potential use of falsified Vax passes. The concerns are surrounding the initial version of the Vax Pass, which shows your name, vaccine received, and date you received it. You simply present an ID with a name matching the one on the Vax Pass, and you will be given service. I've been told that some individuals have been able to create a version of the initial Vax Pass with their name on it, despite never actually receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. If true, this is very concerning and could jeopardize our COVID-19 situation. It amazes me how much effort some people would put into avoiding a public health measure, when in reality, they're only in place to keep us all safe. I can confidently say that nobody in this chamber enjoys COVID and the protective measures that follow it, but we are doing what medical experts tell us we need to do and to keep on doing to protect one another. It was for those reasons that I was so bothered when I heard about people subverting to Vax passes. Not only is they endanger fellow islanders, they are endangering the island economy, island schools, and island healthcare facilities. While there are concerns with the original Vax Pass, I am told that the QR code technology will ensure these methods are fully eliminated. In the coming weeks and months, as we enter the winter season, government must ensure COVID-19 protection measures are being followed. One way that can be achieved is by phasing out the original VAC pass and moving to the QR code manual. This would eliminate any potential for falsification of the initial VAX pass because everyone will have a distinct electronic QR code. I would encourage the government to immediately explore all means available to eliminate the potential manipulation of VAX passes and hold those who falsify records fully accountable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Laurie Mckay, third-party whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, I had the opportunity to tour the new renovations at the O'Leary Cavendish Farms Arena, which was the recipient of the 2017 Kraft Hockeyville Legacy Project. So instead of using the $100,000 in prize money to make some minor renovations, community volunteers with the help of provincial and federal partners grew that amount to $1.7 million. This large renovation will set the rink up for another 30 years, Mr. Speaker. First thing that struck me upon the arrival at the rink was a newly paved parking lot, beautiful new landscaping, and a computerized electronic sign, which was sponsored by the Warren Ellis family, who are longtime supporters of projects like the O'Leary Arena. The entrance to the rink underwent extensive renovations, including accessibility upgrades, a fresh coat of paint, and once inside, you are greeted in a spacious new lobby that provides easy access to the canteen and washrooms. The floor is painted maroon with black stripes to represent team colors. There's an upgraded elevator that will ensure accessibility access to the new upstairs heated section to watch on-ice activities. The second floor also has a new manager's office and community rooms to host tournaments and meetings for other events. The newly renovated canteen offers seating capacity at ice level and provides new flooring, allowing skaters to access the canteen without having to remove their skates. There will also be a new referees room, a sporting shop that's going to be leased out to purchase hockey and figure skating equipment. Energy efficiency lighting has been installed over the ice surface, and major upgrades have been made to the plant and dehumidifier. While these upgrades may not be noticeable as structural ones, these initiatives actually took up the majority of expenses. To top it off, the rink also got a new Zamboni sponsored by Cavendish Farms, another valuable community partner, which lends its name to the upgraded arena. So I'd like to congratulate rink manager Nancy McMillan, to the Hockeyville Fab Five, and the new arena board of directors led by Wade Sweet and David Harris. This has been a great accomplishment and one that will last for many years. And Mr. Speaker, as you're well aware, rinks are the heart and soul of every small community, and O'Leary's heart is beating strong due to the great volunteers who give their time and effort to take on any challenge, Mr. Speaker. Thanks.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our province owns a considerable amount of land, and I'm not speaking about parks or agricultural land. I'm speaking about land that is suitable for housing. The largest such parcel is in Hillsborough Park. I think it's about 80 acres, which is almost has room for a small city, but there are many smaller parcels all over PEI. Recently, this government has attempted to increase our housing stock by helping to fund developers to build apartments. While affordable apartments may be included, the end result is that we get larger emporiums of apartments owned by developers but funded with public tax dollars. I suggest that public money and land should always be used to create more affordable dwellings that are owned and operated by individual islanders, be it co-op apartments, co-housing, condos, or other kinds of modest family homes. That is what we want more of, not ever bigger developers and apartment owners. Please use the public funds and public land only for creating more places for islanders to start a new family and create their own home equity in settings they control themselves. This is urgent. We appear to have an entire new generation of young families unable to ever afford a home now. This government must start by looking at the land already owned by the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as notice. No? For first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. The Premier was in Ottawa last week to meet with the Prime Minister, and I'm hoping he can provide Islanders with an update on some of the outstanding federal provincial issues. I'm thinking here particularly of carbon pricing, of childcare, and of universal Pharmacare. A question to the Premier. Have you come to any agreements with Ottawa on any of these issues?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I did make a whirlwind trip to Ottawa on Friday to meet with the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, to talk about many important issues. In terms of childcare, we have solidified a pretty significant childcare deal, which will end up resulting in $10 a day daycare and childcare in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker, and that's a 5-year agreement which we hope will be extended into the future and long into the future. We continue to work with the federal government and the various departments on our carbon pricing plan, Mr. Speaker, which I expect we will have in place prior to the end of this calendar year. It's not all finalized yet. And Mr. Speaker, I have to admit I'm at a loss as to what the third one was, Mr. Speaker. Pharmacare, yes. Pharmacare, we signed a letter of intent right before the federal election, Mr. Speaker, to discuss Pharmacare, and I continue to lobby extensively for Prince Edward Island, where the jurisdiction that has the least amount of drug coverage, Mr. Speaker, in the country, and are requiring and demanding a Pharmacare program that works for all islanders. We have the commitment of the federal government to sit down and hammer out the details, Mr. Speaker, but it's in the infant stages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Speaker. So one of the most important federal provincial priorities for Prince Edward Island is the creation of a basic income guarantee. We've seen that reflected in, firstly, unanimous support for a motion here in 2016 in the House, the Special Committee on Poverty's recommendations and the Premier's enthusiastic endorsement of the concept, and also the highlighting of it in his recent Growth and Recovery Plan. A question to the Premier. Did you discuss this with the Prime Minister when you met in Ottawa last week?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, on this particular visit, we had a very focused agenda, and the conversation of a universal basic income wasn't on this particular agenda, but it's something that I have raised on many, many different occasions with the Prime Minister. And as I was saying to Senator Kim Pate, who was here, I'm encouraged that the Prime Minister hasn't said no to what we put forward, but we can't mistake that for yes, and we continue, Mr. Speaker, and I am enthusiastic about supporting it, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a way for PEI to find a creative solution, Mr. Speaker, to something that will help many people who need it, but will also serve as a potential economic stimulus for this province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. So on November the 5th, as the Premier decided, more than half of the sitting Canadian senators signed a letter calling for federal support for Prince Edward Island to be the place where we have guaranteed livable basic income and have it piloted here. The letter states, and I quote, "Guaranteed livable basic income would deliver significant benefits to islanders at a relatively low cost to the federal government." The letter goes on to state, "Moreover, it would enhance PEI's serious commitment to the province's poverty elimination strategy." That letter opens with the line, "Let's get her done." A question to the Premier. When it comes to instituting a basic income guarantee on Prince Edward Island, are you the Premier who's going to get her done?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I surely hope so, not for me or some kind of extra street kid for me being Premier, but because it's an important program for PEI. Mr. Speaker, we do need a federal partner who could recognize what we're trying to do here. I do think the federal government is aware of what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker, and I think and I feel that we will get there, Mr. Speaker. We've taken some measures here as a province to begin the process, but much work remains. But I am an optimistic person by nature, Mr. Speaker, but I am very hopeful and optimistic that we can get something significant here and that PEI could be a leader for the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker, in partnership with the federal government.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The process of making a change of name and change of gender identification requires 2 separate forms, fees, and requirements for documentation. A question to the Minister of Justice. Given that a change of gender and change of name are likely to happen at the same time, will you commit to simplifying this into one process?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, and that's a very good question, and of course we'll take every step to simplify the process, Mr. Speaker, and see where it can be changed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, One constituent who wrote to me said their family was charged $185 for a change of name and $50 for a change of gender identification. That seems exorbitant for something that's so vital and essential to someone's identity, and actually it's unclear where there's even authority in the regulations for such an exorbitant charge. I'd love to know your thoughts on that, Minister. But a question to the Minister, have you considered waiving the fees altogether for a change of name and change of gender for transitioning Islanders?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety.
Speaker, and I have to acknowledge that that is an exorbitant amount of money, and I wasn't aware of that, and thanks for bringing that to my attention, and we'll definitely have a look at that, see if we can make changes to that right away. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that answer, Minister, because I see no justification for it in the regulation, so I'm glad you're going to look into it. The change of sex also requires a written statement from a medical practitioner, which creates a barrier for people updating their personal information, especially when so many Islanders don't have access to a family doctor. Question to the Minister. If a person submits a written declaration stating that they have assumed, identify with, and intend to maintain a gender identity that corresponds with the requested change, why do they require a written statement from a medical professional to confirm that?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and yeah, that seems an overreach, Mr. Speaker, and it's something that I think people that are transgendering, Mr. Speaker, they need things simplified. They need every support they can get, Mr. Speaker, and I'll have the department look at our process, Mr. Speaker, and see if we can make it easier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister of Education. Can you please provide an update on the creation of a registry for students who attended Three Oaks Senior High School during renovations when dangerous particulates, including asbestos, were mishandled?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. Certainly, the registry, it is almost ready to be rolled out, so the notifications will be sent out to individuals involved in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, we were waiting until the Power School platform was ready to be used, and certainly that is now made available, so the member should receive an update on that within the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly look forward to that update. In November 2019, I brought forward a motion to prohibit construction that could result in the release of dangerous particulates in schools with children present, an unnecessary and potentially very harmful risk to students. This motion passed unanimously. However, a recent Guardian article identified that on October 16, 2020, asbestos removal work may have taken place at Mount Stewart Consolidated School while students were in the school. Question to the Minister of Education. Were staff and students put at risk by allowing work to remove or clean up areas of contamination with asbestos to happen on a regular school day at Mount Stewart Consolidated?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, Honourable Member, thank you for bringing forward an extremely important question. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the specifics at that school because the matter is with the courts currently, Mr. Speaker, but the department and the public schools branch and CSLF are being very proactive on this issue holistically across our schools, Mr. Speaker. So in March of this year, Mr. Speaker, the public schools branch, they issued a request for proposals for hazard materials assessment in 48 of our schools, Mr. Speaker. And certainly this assessment will ensure we have the most current information in regards to the materials that are in our buildings and support an effective management plan going forward, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again, Honourable Member, for bringing forward the question.
Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Speaker, the article also states that the Workers' Compensation Board has filed court documents alleging that during the incident at Mount Stewart, the school's branch failed to ensure asbestos material samples were collected by a competent person and by a person with a valid contractor's license. The WCB also alleged the school's branch had not developed a proper asbestos management plan and that workers had not been provided with proper respirators. Question to the Minister of Education. What role does the public schools branch play in protecting and ensuring a safe environment for workers during construction involving dangerous particulates such as asbestos, in addition to students, staff, and parents?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and once again, honorable member, thank you for bringing this issue forward, Mr. Speaker. Again, I can't speak to the specifics at this school, Mr. Speaker, because the matter is with the court system, Mr. Speaker, currently. But as I said previously, we are being very proactive on this issue, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that it doesn't happen again, Mr. Speaker. And certainly, as you look at the construction in Montague Elementary, Mr. Speaker, or Elliott River, Mr. Speaker, that construction's not happening whenever the students and our staff are in the schools, because, Mr. Speaker, the safety and well-being of our students and staff is the utmost a priority, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Valley Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, so you provided a couple of examples where construction is not happening during school hours, and that's good to hear. Question to the Minister of Education: have there been any other incidents of asbestos exposure or removal, or the removal of other dangerous particulates during school hours at any other schools?
The Honourable Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and not that I'm aware of.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, we heard that islanders who own their own home and have an annual household income of $35,000 or less may be eligible for a free heat pump. For islanders to access the new provincial dental care program, single clients must earn less than $31,000 to be eligible. For the family drug program, your annual family income must be less than $25,000. The recent low-income tax reduction rate provides an additional $50 a year, but only for islanders who earn between $20,000 and $25,500. Question for the Minister of Finance. Your government seems to have some difficulty in defining low income across the various departments and programs. What benchmark are you using to determine income thresholds?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Honourable Member. That has come to light with the heat pump program, and right now we're working across government departments to ensure that we can be fair and equitable with all programs for all islanders. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're used to seeing programs targeting low-income islanders that are announced long before they launch and then have multiple conditions for eligibility. Sometimes these programs leave unspent money on the table because there aren't enough people who meet the eligibility criteria, or the process to qualify is just too hard. Question for the Minister of Finance. How does your government determine eligibility criteria for programs targeting low-income islanders? Is it by need in the community or the amount of money you have available?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Member, I would say that there probably is a mixed bag as far as qualification. It's something that we are concerned about. We want to make sure that islanders, not only islanders who need help through social assistance, but also low-income, hardworking islanders have accessibility to all the programs that government can provide to them, and that includes the new heat pump program. So we're working across all departments, and it's through the departments that we make those decisions. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Last year, this House approved the report from the Special Committee on Poverty that included adopting the market basket measure as the official measure of poverty for PEI and the key tool to calculate low income. According to the market basket measure, someone living in Charlottetown has to earn at least $44,000 a year to be above the poverty line. In rural PEI, it's $42,500. Question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Your department administers many of the low-income means testing for programs where there is an income threshold. Can you explain why your government is choosing not to update low-income eligibility threshold to the official measure of $44,000?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member across again for bringing forward the Poverty Elimination Act, and one of the things we discussed then was the market basket measure, and we are in fact adjusting our programs towards that, Mr. Speaker, and she of course is speaking about the 100% of market basket measure, which may be appropriate for some programs and not for others, and we have a staff of individuals that are experts in the area, and we are making those adjustments. And Mr. Speaker, sometimes the realities in the world change rapidly, and that's why I know in the department I've asked staff to review thresholds on a regular basis to make sure that we don't fall behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this sitting, the leader of the third party and I, among others, raised issues with safety and maintenance in government-owned seniors' housing units. Since then, we have had many seniors and others associated with seniors' housing from all over the island reach out. This matters because it directly impacts the health and safety of our seniors. It recently came to our attention that there is a publicly owned building that is due to have some elevator maintenance. This means that the elevator will be unavailable for 19 days. There has been no contingency plan shared with the elderly residents who cannot manage stairs. Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Are you aware of this situation?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am aware of this situation. Mr. Speaker, the staff in the Housing Division in Social Development and Housing brought this up as an issue as soon as they found out, and are working to address it. And as I have updates on that, I'd be happy to share with the member across, and of course the residents that live in that building, how we're going to address that issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
This is a huge safety concern. If there's a fire, residents cannot get out. If they are in need of medical care, they cannot get out, and the list goes on. Minister, does your department have a plan in place for when this happens? Is there a plan that you use? Because I find it very hard to imagine that this just happened without any contingency plan getting rolled out, as is what happened. So what is the plan for when you have situations where an elevator needs to get shut down? What do you do?
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member across can realize, and as really has stated, it is a very tough situation, and it's really important that we don't end up with residents in a building that are put in danger because of an elevator being shut down. And so really, the department works at that on a case-by-case basis and does what's appropriate for each resident based on their needs. And that's what we're doing in this case, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to go back to the department, Mr. Speaker, and I'd be happy to share information with the member on any contingency plans that we have documented. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thought those which should be communicated with residents in the first place. I can think of 4 examples just off the top of my head that have been brought to the minister's attention about seniors residents who live in fear and feel threatened by the behaviors and actions of other residents. When the residents who feel threatened come forward, the solution has been to move them to another unit when it becomes available. This is no solution. Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. What is your department's process to support seniors currently living independently whose behaviors are causing others to feel unsafe in their homes?
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's in particular in the larger social housing developments. This is an issue because when you have someone that is experiencing issues themselves and it impacts their neighbors and negatively, it's something the department has to deal with. And when it comes to strategies for dealing with that, our options are fairly limited. I know, Mr. Speaker, I was contacted recently by a constituent of mine who's an expert in the field and has suggested some ways that we can work with seniors to help monitor their safety, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to maybe discussing that with the member across. I think there's some really good suggestions there, very innovative suggestions. It's a difficult one. As you know, there's not a lot of options to move people to, and so we're going to continue to build more social housing, but in the meantime, we'll do the best that we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
I hope you're going to build more social housing. I look forward to talking to you more about that. There's a bit of a trend here in government's inability to respond to complex needs. The other day in a health and social development meeting, an official from the Department of Social Development and Housing said, and I quote, "I think that a reality, and this may not be popular, is that a certain number of individuals in our community who can't access shelter supports or other supports because they're just not in a place where they're able to accept those kinds of supports." Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Now that we have established there is a problem, what are you going to do to house islanders with complex needs?
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as the member across can probably appreciate, there's a whole continuum of complex needs, and it can be at one end, at the very complex side, it can be extremely challenging, Mr. Speaker, and can require constant supervision, that sort of things. And then sometimes there are other supports that are needed, and that's why we have outreach workers, like seniors outreach workers, and a variety of programs to work with people that have complex needs, and we partner with third parties, non-government organizations to provide those services, and we check in on people on a regular basis. We partner with the Canadian Mental Health Association, all these things, and sometimes individuals are visited multiple times a week by multiple organizations, including government members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the recent UPEI medical school announcement, Greg Keefe, Dean of AVC, spoke of a One Health approach to medicine that included animal and ecological health. I'm really interested to hear more about this approach and the role it will play in the new medical school. Question to the Minister of Health. Can you elaborate on what Dr. Keefe meant by a One Health approach to medicine and the role this will play in the new UPEI medical school and center?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I think from my perspective, and I did hear Dr. Keefe reference that, but it's just you look at research, Mr. Speaker, you look at initiatives that are taken through veterinary medicine, that some of that research then can certainly flow through and be utilized in human medicine as well. We have a fantastic veterinary school out here at UPEI, and it was great to see Dr. Keefe there at the official announcement that day and showing that they will be working together as partnerships, the Faculty of Medicine and the Faculty of Veterinarian Medicine, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Larry Mckay.
Mr. Speaker, recently I've been made aware of an all too common occurrence on PEI. I am told since October 31st there was only 2 days that the full fleet of ambulances were operating at capacity in PEI. Earlier this month, the member from Charlottetown West Royalty asked for ambulance response times, and we still haven't yet got an answer. Question to the Minister of Health. If someone were to require an emergency ambulance service on PEI right now, what is the current ambulance response time from Hunter River to West Point in my riding of Laurie Inverness?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member drives that route pretty well every day, so he should very well know if the ambulance did have to respond from Hunter River to West Point, the approximate time. The fact of the matter is, so, Mr. Speaker, that would be a very, very rare occasion, Mr. Speaker. And it baffles me, to be honest. We hear time after time from the honourable member this fear-mongering that he puts out there. I work with the other members, and the third party had a great meeting with one of your colleagues the other day, Mr. Speaker, with one of the honourable member's colleagues, wanting to work together. Yet we have the former Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker, who does nothing but fear-monger and doesn't bring things forward. Thank you.
Larry Inverness.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it is. I think I spoke in the legislature how far it was from Derby to Charlottetown, how far it was from Milo. It's well over an hour, Mr. Speaker. And I'm told that on November 6th, there was only one unit available in PEI. They were posted in Hunter River because it was identified as the central location. If you were a resident of O'Leary, Cape Wolf, or Surrey, you had a medical emergency, you would not take a lot of comfort, Mr. Speaker, that the fact that an ambulance had to come from Hunter River. The wait times in this case would be well over the hours the Minister knows. Minister of Health, do you believe one ambulance station in Hunter River is sufficient to provide ambulance services in the entire province?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for bringing this forward. If that is accurate, I agree. But the thing is, Mr. Speaker, with regard to ambulances, the numbers that were on the road, we have continuously heard here inaccurate information being put forward, Mr. Speaker. We heard here a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago today, that there were going to be 6 ambulances off the road the following day, when in fact, Mr. Speaker, there were no ambulances off the road the following day. Thank you.
Larry Inverness, your second supplementary.
Minister, this is the trend that you don't seem to have any clue what's going on. In your department, you don't know. The ambulances, are only one ambulance in PEI. You have no idea if there's unsafe protocols going on in your facility. Paramedics are a crucial part of the healthcare system, but like many other aspects of the system, they are spread too thin on their duties that they have to fulfill. One major impediment to recruitment and retention is the disparity between wages, Mr. Speaker. And it's not up to the same with the other provincial counterparts. What is the minister doing to ensure Island EMS has more than one ambulance on call to provide services to all of PEI, and that this won't happen again?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, I find it, again, this fear-mongering that the member puts out that Island EMS had only one ambulance to service all of PEI. That is, again, I will go back and check, Mr. Speaker, but to me that is completely inaccurate.
Hard to believe.
Hard to believe, completely hard to believe. But we look back, Mr. Speaker, and we also look at the needs that we have as far as human resources are concerned. I met with the union representing the paramedics here a little over a week ago, Mr. Speaker, and some of the great suggestions that were put forward, suggestions that are going to result and necessitate myself as minister, us as a government, working in partnership with Holland College that puts on the paramedic program, and to look at how we can expand that, how potentially we can expand that to different areas of the province. We on this side are going to be proactive rather than what we had seen previously and what we're seeing right now, of fear-mongering and being reactive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Last week, we heard from Island Montessori, who previously applied to become an early years center, considering the provincial support that accompanies such a designation. They applied to the EYC designation in July and still haven't gotten a response one way or another from the province. In June, the government website indicated 8 new EYCs would be designated over the next 6 months, and that was 5 months ago. Question to the Minister of Education: why has this organization not yet received a response to their EYC application, and how many of the 8 new designations have been awarded so far?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member, for raising this question, Mr. Speaker. The centres who I appreciate, firstly, all the centres that did come forward and apply for the designation, Mr. Speaker. Last year, we designated 5 new centres, Mr. Speaker, and this initial round, we intend to designate 8 new and then an additional 4 by the end of the year, Mr. Speaker. So the centres who had applied, they should be hearing the news here in the coming days. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Well, the lack of response from government has left Montessori in limbo, unable to accurately plan for their future. The expense of new spaces, staffing level, wages, and the adoption of curriculum are only some of the things that will differ depending on whether they receive the EYC designation or not. Due to a lack of response from the government, Montessori was forced to delay their expansion plans at a time when our province is desperately seeking new childcare spaces. It also begs the question of how many other centres are experiencing the same issues. Question to the Minister of Education: what is the current backlog of application for early years centre designations?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And at the beginning of this year, Mr. Speaker, in the budget, we had promised 8 new designations, Mr. Speaker. And then, Mr. Speaker, it was with great pride that we signed on with the federal government onto the 5-year agreement, Mr. Speaker. And we're able now to designate an additional 4 this year, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, the process is very thorough, Mr. Speaker. There's a board that reviews these applications, Mr. Speaker. There's inspections involved, Mr. Speaker, and it's certainly something that I know I've sat down with my staff in the last week, Mr. Speaker, and we've gone through the applications, Mr. Speaker. So I want to assure the member and, again, all those centres that had recently applied that they will be receiving that information here very soon. Thank you very much.
Charlottetown West Royalty, your second supplementary.
Well, that's good to hear. One of the concerns we've heard about the centres that received an early years designation is the impact it has on other spaces. Even the minister on the floor said during the budget estimates this spring after school spaces could be eliminated as a result. The current early years centre model doesn't include after school spaces, meaning centres may eliminate those spaces to allow for more spaces that are supported by the EYC model. Question to the Minister of Education, is your department tracking how many after-school spaces are being eliminated, and when you commit to reviewing the EYC model to protect after-school spaces?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, honourable member, great questions, Mr. Speaker. And I know that there was some discussion around this during the budget estimates, Mr. Speaker. And thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the new spaces really didn't result in the elimination of any after-school spaces, Mr. Speaker. And I understand and appreciate the importance of the before and after-school program, Mr. Speaker. I have a 5-year-old that's currently in those programs, and Mr. Speaker. And certainly we're always looking at the model as it continues to evolve and the sector continues to evolve, Mr. Speaker, and there is a lot of focus placed on this file, Mr. Speaker. I can assure you that we have an incredible team working on it, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I look forward to further discussions with the honourable member across. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And my question is to the Minister responsible for our justice and public safety. So I'm circling back to an issue I've raised before in this House because it matters to my community, it matters to all Islanders. Back in 2016, there was an amendment made to the Coroners Act, which was designed to improve the coroner coverage on and wide, specifically for post-mortem transportation and examinations. Can the Minister tell the House if there has been any improvements to the coroner coverage on and wide?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is a very important question considering our fatalities on our island highways in the last number of days, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member that we are currently in the middle of a full, wholesome review of the coroner's office and to make changes, Mr. Speaker, so we can improve on that service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, in my area of the island, we haven't seen any changes to the response times. And response times for a death investigation can be very can be longer than 3 hours at times. And this is a burden on families that have to see their loved ones laying on the side of the road or in their home for an extended period of time before their body is transported. So one way to address this would be to train local field investigators, as was set out in the amendment, because something needs to change. So, Minister, has there been any field investigators appointed yet? And if so, how many have been hired since this act was proclaimed in 2019?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with the member's with his question, and I truly do acknowledge the importance of this with victims' families have to it's such an important time, and it's a crucial time for the family members to deal with this, and I can't bring those exact numbers to the member today, Mr. Speaker, but I'll be sure to bring those back in the next day or two. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, your second supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And like I said, hiring or appointing field investigators is one way to address it, and especially if they are local. So whether it be, and that's what the reason what the act was amended for, was to have the chief coroner appoint field investigators. They could be a nurse, could be a police person, a paramedic, what have you. And it would really, really help, particularly in one of the areas that I represent. So my question to the same minister, what else is your department doing to improve responsiveness of the coroner services here in Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to answer the question of the member, we are in the full review of the coroner's office, Mr. Speaker. We are well aware that we need more coroners on this island, Mr. Speaker. We are looking at options such as nurses being able to do the work of a coroner, Mr. Speaker, and so, Mr. Speaker, and there's challenges everywhere, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to deal with this, and we know the importance of this, the coroner's office, and we'll be sure to look at it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think often when we think of homelessness on PEI, we often think that it only exists in the larger urban centers such as Charlottetown or Summerside. But, and I'll admit that I didn't think it was a big issue in rural PEI because it's not something you perhaps see as much, or it's not as visible, but it does exist in rural PEI. A question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Minister, are you and your department aware of the number of islanders who are currently homeless in rural PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and definitely in the Department of Social Development and Housing, we realize that homelessness is a problem across the island. And Mr. Speaker, often homelessness is not very visible, especially for people who are couch surfing, that sort of thing. But one thing we can measure is those that are requesting emergency shelter. That's why I often stand in this house and say, if you have individuals that are in need of emergency shelter, please call our emergency shelter line. You can access it through 211. By that measure, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not saying it's complete by any means, we don't actually have many people, very few in fact, that are calling the emergency shelter line from Kings County. However, I'd like to work with the member to do a larger needs assessment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Monica Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there are a number of islanders living in perhaps rural PEI. I know in the Three Rivers area, I met with an individual this morning who's with the food bank that brought to my attention a number of people who were actually living in their car in Montague, in tents in the woods, but you just wouldn't be aware. You can't see them, perhaps when you're on the road. So it is actually an issue, and I was kind of taken back by it, and I didn't realize how much of an issue it actually is. Minister, would you be willing to work with the community, a group in the community, to help establish a temporary or emergency shelter in the Three Rivers area?
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for bringing this up here in the Legislative Assembly and bringing this to my attention as Minister. He mentioned himself that he wasn't entirely aware of it, and sometimes people are living in homelessness. We don't know about it, Mr. Speaker, because they're on, call it the edges of society. So, Mr. Speaker, we definitely want to help work with you to address this issue. This is why I urge every member of this House and to ask your constituents and beyond, if there's someone that needs emergency shelter, please reach out to the department, because we will find them a place to stay right away. Mr. Speaker, now there are challenges keeping them in their communities, and we're going to continue to do that, and I would be very happy to work with the member to address these needs. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Monaco Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that was one of the issues that the individual brought to my attention, is that it's not, these individuals might not want to travel to Charlottetown, or they don't have the means to travel to Charlottetown. I know that we will provide assistance to do that, but they're just not aware that's there, and they want to stay in their community because that's where their family is, or they have the connection in that community. The Rosedale Center, which we call in Montague the Old Manor in Montague, is currently being used for as a vaccination center, and I believe it's also it's a backup site for COVID patients if we were ever into a situation where we had to use that. So it's able to take people in for COVID. So certainly could we not use that center to house these people who need a place to stay right now. Minister, would you be willing to work with the Minister of Health and Wellness to see if we can use the Rosedale Center as a location to house these individuals who need shelter right away?
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we're always open to ideas and solutions being presented in the Department of Social Development and Housing, and I as Minister. So definitely I would love to work with the member and the Minister of Health to explore that as an option, Mr. Speaker. And I should just to enlighten the Legislative Assembly on our process. When someone does request emergency shelter, we work with the individuals on a case-by-case basis, and we do our best to keep them in the community if they need that, Mr. Speaker. That may be renting accommodations for them at a local hotel or motel, but Mr. Speaker, it's an area we continue to improve on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, it was March 10th actually, the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, to great fanfare in this House, made a breathless announcement about yet another RFP for the fabrication yard in Borden that has sat empty since 1997. So during that memorable statement, the Minister said, and I quote, "I'm excited about the possible growth for this project and what it will bring for rural Prince Edward Island." A question to the Minister of Communities and Fisheries. The estimated date for completion of an agreement with the winning party was July the 7th, over 4 months ago. Can you tell the House how many responses your department received and what project we can expect to see in this celebrated piece of property?
The Honourable Minister of Economic, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say I had to jump up on this one just because this falls under my department. So Finance, PEI went out to an RFP for proposals. I believe, and don't quote me on this, I don't have it, I believe we had approximately 8 proposals that come in, a vast majority of ideas. So the department has reviewed them. Obviously, we have to go through the process of the duty consult as well, which we have. But at the same time, what we've decided, we are committed at this point is to work on once and for all getting the fabrication yard cleaned up and working with the community to see what they would like to see there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been hearing concerns about the amount of time it is taking school and childcare staff to administer tests for staff who are unvaccinated. They are telling me that with all other duties and responsibilities, this is just not sustainable. Some have mentioned that staff should go to clinics rather than this be the responsibility of school staff. Question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. If you're not going to mandate vaccines, what is your plan for school staff testing in the long run?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Honourable Member, thank you for the question. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that this has been a challenging time, Mr. Speaker, for our school system. Mr. Speaker, there has been a lot of pressures over the last 20 months, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of our staff who are doing such an incredible job, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through the budget this year, Mr. Speaker, we added a tremendous number of new staff, permanent staff within our schools, Mr. Speaker. And through COVID, Mr. Speaker, we were able to secure an additional funding through the COVID contingency fund, Mr. Speaker, and we were able to hire 50 new teachers, 34 educational assistants, 15 school counselors, Mr. Speaker, 14 youth service workers, Mr. Speaker. So there has been a number of new resources, new additional resources within our school system, Mr. Speaker. And again, recognizing that the burden on the school system has been greater than ever, Mr. Speaker. Government has been there to support our schools, Mr. Speaker. And thanks you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member keeps interrupting me, Mr. Speaker. So my thought process is going out of line, but Mr. Speaker, we are there, Mr. Speaker. Thankfully, thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the majority of our staff, I believe we're upwards of 95% of our school staff, Mr. Speaker, our teachers have been vaccinated, Mr. Speaker, so we're just dealing with a really small percentage there, Mr. Speaker. And I know that they will work with within the school, 97%, that's incredible, Mr. Speaker. So I know that extra 3% that will work with them, Mr. Speaker, and support them in the upcoming weeks and months here, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown, Belvedere, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really pleased to hear the member from Montague-Kilmere talk about the homelessness in his area. We know that sometimes we've had challenges having people recognize the reality of homelessness and how it's affecting Islanders. So I really appreciate him sharing the experience in here, because that validation sometimes is how we make sure that people understand this is affecting everybody. Mr. Speaker, I'm really glad also to hear that the Minister for Social Development and Housing is looking forward to working with the member to address the issues. I'd like to ask the Minister why then we had to wait for a needs assessment to happen in Summerside before we could get any movement on a shelter requirement for that community.
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear the member across is listening to my responses. And, Mr. Speaker, I did actually mention needs assessment in my response to the member as well. And we're going to work to explore options, and we're going to work to do a needs assessment. We're going to work to identify the problem. And again, I implore every member in this House to work yourselves with your constituents. If you have people who are homeless and especially in need of emergency shelter, make sure you call an emergency shelter line so that we can help them and we know exactly what the needs are. We want to help people. We don't want them living in tents, Mr. Speaker. We don't want them sleeping in ATM machines. We don't want them sleeping on park benches. We want to help them, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're going to work with the member from Montague-Kilmere to explore options there. That's why we work to support Lifehouse in Summerside. That's why we did a needs assessment, and we're going going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to address the homelessness problem in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of question period. Ministers by statement. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess I have another public service announcement here today, Mr. Speaker. Across the country, in every province and territory, residents will be hearing a loud noise on their cell phones, TVs, and radios this week. Islanders can expect to hear on November 17th at 12:55 p.m. This is an alert-ready system. PI, Emergency Measure Organization, EMO, is helping the Alert Ready conduct the regular test to make sure everything is working properly, Mr. Speaker. Islanders with with devices can expect to hear a loud alarm following the message in both official languages. There is no reason to be afraid. It is a test, and the message can clearly say that. With that, Mr. Speaker, if there were a real emergency, the importance that all residents pay attention to what the message says. It could be a matter of life and death. It means in a real emergency, Islanders will need to pay close attention to what they ask for and in that message, Mr. Speaker. This year, our government made some changes to the Alert Ready system. Police services, the Charlottetown, Kensington, Summerside Police Services will also, as well as RCMP, will be able to issue their own emergency measures. This is an important step for public safety, Mr. Speaker. They are on the ground. They can tailor a message so that it can be specific to one part of the province. PIEMO will, of course, continue to work closely with law enforcement partners, but we know it is an excellent resource for law enforcement to have in their toolkit. Mr. Speaker, most importantly, in the emergencies, making sure critical information gets out to residents as quickly and accurately as possible. Alert Ready will help with that. My thanks go out to all Islanders in advance of the test and all future situations that they receive emergency messages for paying attention. My thanks goes out to law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, and other peace officers and first responders who are the first on site in an emergency situation. Thank you for all you do to keep our island communities and people safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, I don't really have a lot to add to that. It is pretty much just a public service announcement. I recognize the importance of the Alert Ready system. Certainly, I think it streamlines the process of getting this information out to people. Good to know there's a test coming. Thanks for the update, Minister.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty, and a third-party House Leader.
Yeah, and I was just listening too, and I think that this is an important announcement because I don't know, I see over the last little while things are changing. You look at British Columbia right now with the floods and the fires and some of the issues that have faced PEI with hurricanes, and you look only over to Nova Scotia with the tragedy there with the RCMP and how we have to make sure that we can get the information out to a lot of people very quickly. And I think this is an important announcement. We have to make sure everybody has devices. We have to get to them quickly, and this is a great announcement from EMO, and I want to make sure that everybody's listening for the 17th, and here's that I don't know what the sound will be like, but it'll get your attention. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the outstanding work of our island teachers and their successful annual convention, which took place this past Friday and concluded yesterday. Mr. Speaker, the convention is a long-standing island tradition which allows teachers from across the island to come together to stay current on education issues, network, and learn from each other. I was pleased to bring greetings at the convention on Friday morning and bring them up to date on our priorities and our progress. Mr. Speaker, I recognize that we have asked a lot from teachers in recent years. At the beginning of the school year, most of us hoped it would be somewhat of a return to normal. However, COVID-19 continues to have a big impact in our society and in our school systems. I want to commend all our teachers who went above and beyond this school year, who truly rose to the occasion. When an outbreak occurred in our schools and we had to move to elevated risk, they responded quickly and with grace and precision, and I thank them for that. Our teachers are not only responsible for educating our students, but they also work to ensure that students have a safe and caring learning environment, and they support the social and emotional well-being of our students. I have heard from our teachers at Charlottetown Rural who have faced many challenges this year, but through it all, they have shown resilience and veracity. After the bus accident in Kingston, followed by the COVID cases last week in our Cornwall schools, the staff were pillars of compassion and understanding for our students. Mr. Speaker, I want to reaffirm for our teachers that I am committed to supporting them, and that we as a government are fully aware that investments in education are the best investments any government can make. I want teachers to know that they are seen and they are highly valued and appreciated. Our teachers continue to go above and beyond their call of duty, and for that I say thank you. Thank you for sticking by your students throughout this tumultuous year and greeting each one with a smile every morning. Thank you for creating a safe and stable environment during their school days. Thank you for communicating with families many times beyond your normal working hours. And thank you for your empathy, your patience, and your perseverance. We recognize and salute your selflessness. Congratulations on a successful convention and for all you do for Island students every day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, South Drive.
Speaker, and there was much celebration over the weekend in my house as well, because it was a 5-day weekend for all my kids, so they were very happy about that as well. But we've had another successful convention season under our belts, and I'm very happy about that, because it's a valuable opportunity to take a step back and hear about best practices from others and make connections with the rest of their colleagues. Our system is experiencing challenges, and this last year has thrown even more onto the plates of exhausted educators. The benefits of the camaraderie created by getting together can't be understated. The morale boost that comes from sharing our lived experiences with those who understand you best is something we could all use more of. With much of the in-person aspect of a convention affected by COVID guidance this year, I've heard of educators getting together this year to virtually attend the convention as a group and try to get more of that personal connection. I look forward to the day when the whole group of educators can gather together again. To our educators, I would say this: your professionalism is recognized, your efforts are appreciated, and your value to society is immense. The changes that are needed to help alter the course of society itself begin in our classrooms. It is my belief that we need to ask our educators how best to proceed, then we need to listen, and then we need to act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty and the third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks a lot for this statement. And I too hope that the convention went well. And some of the issues that I know were talked about there was diversity and talking about different issues around there. They had guest speakers in to talk about that, and I'm glad to see, and I hear a lot about that, glad to see the teachers moving forward and doing things to proactively look at that. This convention is so important because it does build community. Right now, the teachers have been through so much, and their well-being and their wellness is really top of mind. If our teachers feel good and fit and ready to teach, they're going to be better teachers, and our kids will get better educated. And I also want to say a big shout out to the teachers at Charlottetown Rural. They've been through a lot, and I've heard from some of them, and I want to make sure that they had a good convention, and I want to say shout out to them as well as the teachers at West Royalty who have dealt with something this year that was very taxing on them. So I hope they had a great convention, and I appreciate the minister's statement. Thank you very much.
End of statements. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter from Senator Kim Pate, signed by 47 senators, actually, calling for federal support of PEI guaranteed livable basic income. And I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? Carry. The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the point-in-time count for 2021 from the John Howard Society of PEI, along with some notes giving it context in the form of a letter from myself. And I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Show it carried. The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support from Professor Larry Haven from St. Mary's University for my NDA legislation, explaining the problems of NDAs within workplaces specifically and the risks to unsuspecting others when NDAs are used to hide serial harassers. And I move, seconded by Charlottetown Brighton, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support for my forthcoming NDA bill from the Canadian Women's Foundation, explaining why legislating this change is necessary to address the power imbalances that exist between victims and perpetrators, and that leading jurisdictions like California have not seen significant impacts on settlement agreements, either the amount paid to survivors or their ability to settle as a result of this legislative change. And I move, seconded by Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support from Dugald Lamont, the leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party, talking of how this is not a partisan issue, but an issue of justice, Mr. Speaker. We may be the first legislature to debate this topic, but I suspect Manitoba will be second. I move, seconded by Summerside South Drive, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support for the same bill from the PEI Rape and Sexual Assault Centre, explaining how essential it is for survivors who have experienced trauma that includes the most serious form of betrayal, humiliation, and degradation be able to talk to people so that they can begin the healing process. And I move, seconded by Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support from the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario, explaining that racialized victims often feel no agency to come forward when they are experiencing harassment, and how important it is for marginalized communities to not be silenced by NDAs. And I move, seconded by Mermaid Stratford, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support from BIPOC Usher, explaining the need for this legislation to consider not only sexual harassment, but all forms of harassment, including racial harassment, which is all too common. The letter explains that racial harassment leaves people feeling scared, insecure, depressed, anxious, and alone, and this legislation would ensure those who have experienced unlawful harassment are able to get the support they need. And I move, seconded by Charlottetown Parkdale, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter of support from Zelda Perkins, a brave woman who broke her NDA with Harvey Weinstein after trying to protect a colleague from abuse. She speaks of the devastating personal and professional ramifications of signing away what she describes as her human right to speak about a trauma. She broke her agreement against all legal advice, despite the fact that this case, the NDA, was covering a criminal act of sexual assault, which is why legislating is the only way to actually make this change. And I move, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Did I miss any table of documents? Reports by committees. Introduction of government bills, government motions, orders of the day government. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member from Aldona, that the 26th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order 26, an act to amend the Prince Edward Island Land Protection Act number 2, Bill number 42, in committee.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member from Aldona, that this House do now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be entitled an Act to amend the Prince Edward Island Lands Protection Act number 2. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for answered?
Andrea Triolo, Senior Legislative and Applied Research Analyst, Agriculture and Land.
Thank you very much and welcome. Honorable members, this bill has been, this is probably the second time it's been on the floor, so it's already been established that we're just going to open up to general questions. We've already asked some questions, so the floor is now open again. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Andrea. Thanks for being here. So a large part of this bill, the amendments to the Lands Protection Act, are a revision of Bill 35, which was passed here in 2019, but was never actually proclaimed. So again, for the record and for people's edification, can you outline the differences between this bill and which parts of Bill 35 you've incorporated and the original Bill 35, which will not be proclaimed?
Yes, so the parts that have been incorporated are the definitions of corporation, hold, and share, in addition to the legal and beneficial right term in land holding. There's also been the addition of Section 9.1 with some modifications. We've added the list at Section 11, subsection 1 from Bill 35, and we've made the amendments to the regulation making powers at Section 17.1. What's not been incorporated is Sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 of Bill 35, which are the fine amounts. And that's it.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. So you mentioned that the only bits not incorporated are the bits related to the fines. Can you just, again, for the record, explain what the changes are between the amendments today and the original Bill 35?
Yes, so with respect to the fines, the fine amounts have remained as are currently in the Lands Protection Act. I believe there was one change that we've now made. We've gone from a $10,000 administrative penalty to $20,000. And the reason that we've kept them the same is rather than just increase fines, we've made amendments to the investigative order and offense powers and strengthened those sections.
Okay. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. So looking at the new Section 5, Sub 2, which is the requirement for cabinet approval for the sale of shares that include land, it's essentially the same as a bill that was brought forward in the last sitting for Mermaid Strafford. And can you explain for us how that process will work?
Yes.
A cabinet approval process.
Currently, a corporation, if they have an excess of 5 acres, has to apply for permission to acquire a land holding from the Lieutenant Governor and Council, so they make that application to IRAC. This would now require the corporation to apply for an amended permission if they are proposing a transaction that will make a material change to its shareholders, and that would result in a resident person having an aggregate land holding in excess of 400 acres.
Leader of the Opposition.
So thank you for that explanation. So why was the threshold of 400 acres chosen?
Yeah, so it was a number that was mentioned by Horace Carver when he appeared before the Standing Committee in 2020 in relation to resident person land limits. We looked at that number and we kept in mind that we want to balance public concerns and against the impact that we'll have on residents, and we felt that 400 was an adequate number for resident person applications.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. So you also have a threshold of greater than 5% of the shares. So can you explain what that is?
Sure. With respect to the material change, I
Yes.
just want to clarify. Yeah, so in the Lands Protection Act currently, an aggregate land holding includes the relevant amount of a land holding in any corporation of which 5% of shares are held. So we've just included that as the material change threshold for when it would trigger a resident person application.
Okay.
Leader of the Opposition.
So, I mean, the big question here is, would the changes that we're proposing, and hopefully will pass in this amended bill, would that have captured the Brendel land sale?
Let me just find the section.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a seminal question.
I can answer.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
sorry.
Right.
I don't know what
Yes,
it
it
is.
would
Yeah.
have. That's it.
Chair.
Leader of the Opposition.
And of course, the problem, and I appreciate the answer, Minister, but the problem is we, not knowing the details of the Brendel land sale, we just have to take your word for that.
Some of you.
Yep, yes, fair point. But for many of us, that's something that we just don't have full knowledge of. And I'm wondering, I guess I'll direct this question to the Minister, taking your word for it that this will actually capture had it been in place prior to the Brendel land sale, it would have captured that and it would not have gone ahead. Are there any loopholes or weaknesses, as you call them, will any remain after the amendments that we're discussing today?
Oh, I certainly hope not. No.
Leader of the Opposition.
I hope not too, but as we know, legislation will be, people will look for the weak spots in legislation, and we see that all over the place. And do you feel that we have dealt with the weaknesses that clearly existed in the bill and allowed such a transaction as the Brendel land sale to take place? Do you feel that we have closed all of the conceptual loopholes or weaknesses that you can imagine at this point in time?
Yes, I do.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks. So I see in subsection 4 of this new section 5 too, that you're specifying that it doesn't actually apply retroactively. So can you explain why that is the case?
Yeah. It just makes it clear that if you are a resident person who has acquired shares in a corporation prior to the date this will come into force, you don't have to make a retroactive application if you are over 400 acres. So on the go forward, anytime there is a material change to a corporation that would result in a resident being over 400 acres, they have to make an application. But if you've acquired land legally in the past, you don't have to make an application.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. So moving on to section 6, which is the landholding declaration and people who are over the limit when the bill comes into effect, and the divestiture schedules, particularly the divestiture schedules on this. So can you explain what you're trying to accomplish with the time frame that you have in this section?
We're looking at landholders who have legally acquired land in accordance with the laws that were in place, who are now going to be thrown offside as a result of our amendments. So they're not people who've contravened the act, they just, as a result of these amendments, will be offside. So we want to take care to ensure that affected landowners are not unfairly punished with a strict schedule. We want to make sure that it coincides with an ability to have favorable market conditions. We have taken other things into account, such as permitting enough time to implement succession plans, accounting for leasing situations where commitments have already been made in advance of a 3 or 4 year crop rotation. And as I say, this schedule was taken from a previous version of the Lands Protection Act that was in force, but we think that the numbers are appropriate given that we're trying to give people who have legally acquired land enough time to divest of that land.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks. So that previous version you just mentioned, Andrea, dates back to 1998, and clearly a lot has changed in the world, and particularly in terms of land holdings here on Prince Edward Island. And I've had a lot of people concerned that 9 years to fully divest seems like a very long time.
Sure.
You mentioned a few considerations there that landowners who, and I absolutely accept that these are people who currently are not offside, but presuming this bill gets passed, will find themselves in violation of the law, that time needs to be granted for them, reasonable time needs to be granted for them to divest. I understand that. You mentioned a few things. You talked about global agreements they may have on rented land. You talked about favorable market conditions. And you made a sort of general statement about needing reasonable time to divest. So can you go through each of those things and explain why you feel that the 9 years is an appropriate time frame?
Sure. So when you're talking about leasing situations, for example, there will have commitments that have already been made in advance of 3- and 4-year crop rotations. So we want to give enough time to allow at least one cycle of crop rotations. When you're talking about divesting 50% of the land, for example, you can't necessarily think about land in one big plot. Farmers might have land in various areas. So divesting 50% in 5 years will give them enough time to sort of look at all of their areas of land and see which percentage of those lands can be divested while still allowing the crop rotation. I'll also say it's at a minimum, these requirements, so IRAC can vary the years and the percentage. It's at a minimum 50% in 5 years, at a minimum 80% in 7 years, and at a minimum 9%, or 100% in 9 years, forgive me. So that's something else that we've taken into consideration.
Leader of the Opposition.
Okay, so I heard there, Andrea, that in order for landowners to work their way through a 3- or 4-year crop rotation, it's appropriate and fair, and I agree with you that we provide them with time to do that. Most farms operate on a 3-year rotation, some on a 4, some on a 2 and 5. Like it does vary, but I would say that the vast majority of them are operating on a 3-year crop rotation cycle. So 9 years is 3 complete rotations of that land. What is the rationale for making this more than just a simple 3-year divestment schedule, or 4 perhaps?
I would say, so assuming 4 years, for example, because we don't know who has a 2-year agreement or a 3-year, so on. Again, you don't want to, or the intention is to not unfairly punish people who have legally acquired land with an overly strict schedule. So we used the 1998 schedule with the 5-year and the 7-year and the 9-year, knowing that IRAC has the discretion to vary it if they choose to. And we felt that that was appropriate as not being unfairly strict, giving enough people enough time to divest their lands fully in market with consideration of market conditions as well.
Leader of the Opposition.
Right, so the market conditions, of course, one would love to know what the market conditions are going to be next year or the year afterwards. That's nothing that we can possibly imagine, except we do know that the market of the last few years has been extremely hot for land on Prince Edward Island, particularly agricultural land. So we're not asking anybody who is offside, to use that phrase that we've both adopted.
Right.
At this point in time, we're certainly not asking them to divest at a time when the market is unfavorable at the moment. So I think we can safely say that criteria, or that rationale for extending it to 9 years is probably not a strong argument. Can you respond to that?
Sure. If I may. there's so many variables to talk about too. I mean, some of these farms know it's because of these amendments they're going to be offsides. These farms have business plans. They've probably borrowed money to buy this land. They have to ensure they are profitable, and with this 9 years, it gives the profitability. We don't want farmers to undo harm to financial beings of farmers that are trying to just farm. So it sounds long, but this isn't going forward. This is the farms that are being affected with no undue cause of their own. They're just law-abiding farmers, and margins are tight in farms. It's easy for us just to say, yeah, you sell off that land. That's easy. I feel that's a touch of an overreach, but that's where I feel it's being fair, and it's all about being fairness here.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Chair. And I absolutely agree with you. There's nobody in this room who wants to cause undue duress to farmers here, when financially or otherwise. And I think we're just trying to find a place which provides them with reasonable time to divest this land, which will again be offside when this bill passes. And I'm just trying to ascertain what that reasonable amount is. And I've heard from many people that 9 years seems extremely excessive. And I'm wondering if you considered a shorter time period when you were putting this bill together.
I wouldn't necessarily say we had a shorter time period set in stone, but we certainly considered what would be an appropriate amount of time. We felt that when we found the amendments from 1998, given all of these considerations, that would be an appropriate amount of time for 100% divestment, with 50% in 5 years and 80% in 7 years.
Leader of the Opposition.
So I'm wondering who you consulted with when you were coming up with that provision, or was it just a retroactive scan through the legislation from 1998?
It was part of we certainly scanned previous legislation. We've consulted with IRAC on these amendments and all of the amendments. We spoke with legal services to ensure that we were achieving what we intended to achieve within our department, and we felt again that these numbers were appropriate.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Chair. And we've talked a lot about one side of the equation here, which is the individual farms who are going to be over the limit when this legislation passes. I think one of the concerns which has been brought to me again repeatedly over the years is of new farmers, young farmers often, who are struggling to acquire land because it's simply not available or it's unaffordable. And the timely divestment of those who have excess land would really have a positive impact on the marketplace and in terms of availability of land for some of these small new homesteading farmers who are trying to get into agriculture and are prevented from doing so because there simply isn't land available. So I'm wondering if you spoke to anybody, any new farmers, any smaller farmers, any farmers from perhaps outside the province who have made application to move here and are unable to because of an unavailability of land.
So are you asking about a land bank? Sorry, it feels weird talking to a piece of plexiglass. But are you talking about a land bank, or is that?
Leader of the Opposition.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about this excess land, and we haven't actually asked any questions about how much possibly is out there. I mean, and that's a critical thing. Maybe there's just a few acres, maybe there's thousands of acres, we don't know. But if that land were to be sold, if this legislation mandated that land be sold and come onto the market, it would make land available without government getting involved. I don't want government to get involved and purchase it as part of a land bank, but simply that this land would become available on the market for potential farmers who are looking for land and want to get started. So no, not a land bank. This is simply allowing land to come, or mandating that land enter the marketplace. And my question was, have you spoken with any farmers who have requested that be an important thing in the near term, not 9 years from now, but they want to get into farming this year or next year?
I haven't spoken with anyone particularly on these amendments on the Lands Protection Act regarding that, but it's something that we're definitely looking at with the Future Farmer program. It's very important that we have the next generation of farmers here to and can make a real go at it, so to speak. And we need to, I don't know if this is going to necessarily affect it the way you are wording your question. I think that's up for interpretation, but I don't think it's going to be drastically. It's unfortunately the land is in big demand. It's the highest bidder right at the moment, and I think any land that comes for sale right now is in extremely high demand.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, and you've just sort of made my argument for me in a couple of areas. One, given the favorable or unfavorable market conditions, and certainly at the moment selling land, we're in a very favorable market. And the second part is that supply and demand issue of that we clearly, land is, people are looking for land, agricultural land at the moment. And I'm wondering whether you have any sense of how many individuals or corporations are actually significantly over their limits at the moment? Is there any estimation of that?
We wouldn't have that data, no, because it's not something that's been captured before.
Sure.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks. So at this point, I'd like to move an amendment to this section of the bill, Chair. And do you want me to move the amendment now? I know the clerk has copies available. Yes, indeed.
So yeah, if you'd like to read it and answer it.
Sure. So move that Section 4 of Bill 42 is amended by the deletion of proposed subsection 6.01 sub 3 and the substitution of the following. Requirements of divestiture schedule. 3. The divestiture schedule shall require at a minimum that A, at least 50% of the excess land holding of the person or corporation shall be divested within 3 years of the date specified in the schedule, and B, that 100% of the excess land holding shall be divested within 4 years of the date specified in the schedule.
Thank you very much. Just give one moment to ensure each member has a copy, and then we'll continue on with discussion.
Is frozen, I guess. I'm going to go to Peter first, and then come to you. Okay, shoot. I'm good.
Leader of the Opposition, I'll give you a moment if you want to talk about the reason why.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay. Right. So the reason I delayed bringing this amendment forward till now is that a lot of the arguments that I think support this amendment were made in the discussion we just had. Namely that, yes, we need to be fair and reasonable with farmers in order that they have time to divest their land through no fault of their own who find themselves offside because of the changes we're making in the law. I've heard that the main reason why we need to give this time is so that farmers who are in the middle of a crop rotation, and of course with a crop rotation not every year is a cash crop, often it's one cash crop and then forage for the next couple of years, or it would vary. Anyway, you know that within a 3-year cycle at least one of those 3 years, there will be a cash crop taken off that land, at least one of those 3 years. So in allowing 3 years, and in fact 4 years for 100% of that divestiture, even those who have a 4-year crop rotation, and there are some, they're not many, but there are, that allows farmers to, even if they have just completed the cash crop part of their rotation, to go all the way through their crop rotation before they are required to sell the land. Now, some of them will have cashed that crop a year previously, so they won't have to wait necessarily 3 years in order to get their money off that land. And again, in terms of the market conditions, we all know that land that was bought any time in the past is worth significantly more than it was then, so there's certainly no hardship in terms of farmers being required to divest their land now. It's very favorable market conditions. So that's why we came up with 3 years and 4 years as the limits, as opposed to the 3-tiered approach from the original bill, which was 5, 7, and 9. And I look forward to discussions on it. Thanks, Chair.
You're welcome. Minister?
Well, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to read the statement. This schedule only applies to those who will be offside with the Act as a result of those proposed changes. These changes that we introduced will result in some people and corporations and/or corporations being offside, not because they did something illegal, because of the changes of control of the corporation. The purpose of amendments to the Lands Protection Act will result in some people and/or corporations being offside through no fault of their own. As Minister, I want to ensure fairness to all farmers while we strengthen the LPA. Divestiture schedule proposed in this Act is to allow for time for those people and corporations to have legally acquired land but are now offside, time to divest of their excess land. The timeliness for the divestiture must take into account such things as leasing situations, multi-year commitments have already been made in advance of crop rotations, permitting enough time to avoid unfavorable market conditions, permitting enough time to implement long-term succession plans that may involve young farmers, minimizing the impact to our local farm producers and their business. A divestiture schedule of 3 to 4 years, as proposed by the official opposition, may not be enough time to allow farmers to address their crop rotations, schedules, or fully implement their succession plan. This being said, Mr. Chair, I always aim to work together with the opposition, and I'm willing to move to a phase of as opposed to 3-year phase as the original bill. Alongside these change, after consulting, I'm willing to shift the timelines as well. Mr. Chair, I move the motion to amend the Leader of the Opposition's amendment to at least 50% divestiture within 5 years to 100% divestiture and 100% divestiture within 7 years. Mr. Chair, this is likely to create fair conditions to our farmers, and I second them by the Minister of Finance.
Okay, Honourable Minister, you have copies of your, so what this is, it's an amendment to the proposed amendment. Do you have a copy of your amendment to the amendment?
I just have what I read.
Pardon me?
I just have what I read.
Okay, so we'll have to have copies made, and we'll take a short break to have copies made and to ensure that each member has a physical copy in their presence. Members, welcome back. Each of you have a copy of the proposed sub-amendment. I'll give the floor to the minister to read the motion into Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In Section 4 of Bill 42, I move the following amendment to amend in Section 3A, delete the word 3 and replace it with 5. In 3B, delete the word 4 and replace it with 7.
Okay, so now the floor is open for discussion on the amendment to the proposed amendment. Mermaid Strafford.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister and Andrea, for this. So one of the line of questioning from the Leader of the Official Opposition was about farmers who are looking to purchase land, right? We've talked a lot about who would be impacted from the perspective of divestment. But on the other side of it, we do have, and it's not just new farmers, there's lots of farmers out there who have lost land over years from maybe somebody passing away and the land that they were leasing was then sold and a larger farm, offered more money and got that land. And then, so we've had lots of farmers that have had impacts of losing land, especially those that are leased, and then having to reconfigure their whole business plan, right, whenever you do lose the land. And it's very difficult for those farmers to make that change because they have to make that change within a year. They don't get 9 years to make that change, right? So when we were talking about what's the impact to the other side, those are the farmers that are farming 1,200 acres that are looking to go to 15, or farmers that had 18 last year and lost a couple hundred acres because somebody else picked up a lease on that land and then they've had to switch it up. Like, the focus on who has to divest has to be balanced with those that have been impacted by so much land going into the hands of people, above and beyond. So I appreciate your willingness to renegotiate the timelines, because I had really big concerns about waiting 9 years for some of those farmers to be able to get back to where they were prior to having lost some of those leases, right? And really, when we looked at this and talked about it, and I appreciate the original amendment coming forward because it's around the Crop Rotation Act and how we do have 3 and 4 year crop rotations and the 2 to 5. So I appreciate the willingness to negotiate down from the 9 years, because I do think 9 years it's basically asking people who have been impacted over the last X number of years to wait a decade to get this resolved. So I will support your amendment to the amendment, but I also really want to ensure that not just those that have to divest are top of mind for us, but also, the hundreds of farmers who have been impacted over the years, who have been asking for the spirit and intent of the Lands Protection Act to be recognized. And I get we're talking a lot in numbers, but it's been so long that those farmers have been asking for somebody to stand up and make the changes, and we've had to have review over review in order to prove what they've experienced is actually true. So I really, really hope that through this whole process we balance the needs of both sides, not just those that have gone over a certain limit, but the ones that have been impacted because they've lost land because of an accumulation of land by a few. So I will support your amendment to the amendment, and we have lots more questions around the legislation as a whole, but understanding that there is a whole segment of farmers that I have been focused on for a very long time, and I really hope that we can balance those scales to make sure that their needs are also put forward as we go through the debate on this bill, because I think that that's incredibly important to have their voices heard. We know that the ones that have been that will have to divest, that they have been heard. I'm not so sure that the other have as big of a voice, okay?
Yeah.
So I will be supporting, and I don't really have any questions, but thank you, Chair.
Any other questions on the sub-amendment? Shall it carry?
Carry.
Okay. We are now back to the amendment with, as amended. The floor is open for discussion. So I did have people, Leader of the Opposition, you had put forward that motion. Did you have anything else on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Any further discussion? Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And I know the Leader of the Official Opposition had asked how many farms do you expect will be impacted by these amendments? Can you, and I'm not sure, you didn't seem to have a number, but do you have a ballpark? Like, I know there seemed, when we were going through this before and had a lot of debate back and forth, that we seemed to have an idea of how many people would be impacted. Bill 35 didn't get proclaimed, and when I asked that in the House, Minister, you had said because there was going to be unintentional impacts because of the probably not enough consultation. So with this, has there been enough consultation? I'm just wondering if you have an idea as to how many farms will be impacted by the requirement to divest.
We don't have.
We don't have the numbers. We think it's just a handful, but it could be more. It could be less.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And can you walk me through that process of divestment? So how they're going to be identified, and then how they're going to be notified that they have been identified? Can you walk me through that process?
As a result of the amendments the proposed amendments, should they come into force, a person or a corporation, there will be a self-reporting requirement. So they will submit to IRAC a declaration of all of their land holdings and what they would be over. IRAC will also be sending letters, because there are some people who may potentially be above their limits that they would be aware of, so they would send them a reminder letter to let them know that, I think the December 31st, 2022 date, they need to submit the declaration. IRAC will then have 60 days from the time that they receive that declaration to provide the divestiture schedule.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So for the self-declaration part, how do we know that people will have made that self-declaration, and how will IRAC know that people party has followed that process? Is there checks and balances in place?
Every year, if you're near the limits, you have to self-declarate every year. It's a requirement from IRAC.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And one of the things that we had heard from IRAC was that an individual didn't have to go through that process. But will these amendments fix the individual having to self-declare as part of that process?
Gives IRAC more authority, Mike, right?
Yeah, if there's an individual or a corporation who will be over, they will have to self-report.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
So, thank you, Chair. So if somebody's been given an order to divest, how is that enforced or monitored to ensure that the divestment happens? And is there penalties there or anything like that?
It's not an order, it's a schedule, because we're not talking about a contravention of the act. So you will get a divestiture, IRAC will provide a divestiture schedule. And that schedule, if you are a person and you have an excess of over 750, and if you are a corporation with an excess of over, forgive me, I don't have the amount right in front of me, you have to report each year. So in that reporting of each year, you would be keeping IRAC abreast of the land that you are divesting.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And what powers does IRAC have to ensure that somebody does follow that schedule?
They would have the powers under the proposed offenses under the new proposed section 15.1 for failures to make disclosure statements, failures to comply with divestiture schedules.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay. So I'm going to go to direct and indirect control as it's in this piece of legislation, okay? And so is that...
We're actually discussing the amendment as amendment.
Oh, are we?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I thought we had moved on, so no, go ahead.
Okay, so is there any further discussion on the amendment as amendment?
That was my fault, sorry.
Yep. Shall the amended amendment carry?
Carry.
Okay, we're back to discussion on the bill as a whole with the amendment. So Mermaid Stratford, did you have a question?
Sorry about that. I thought when we voted, anyway, my apologies.
No worries.
I was out of scope totally. Okay, so the nature of direct and indirect control, we could go to that part of it. So it's changed from Bill 35 by the addition of the clause A and B. Can you explain the addition clauses what these additional clauses add in order for, it's in section 9.1.
9.1, okay. Give me 1 second here. So, sorry, can I just clarify, you want to know the difference between the Bill 35 and what's in the new bill?
Yeah, well, it's changed.
Okay. So the change is in Bill 35, it referred to a section of the Business Corporations Act that had the marker of 25% as a significant interest or significant control. So we've amended that to make it clear that more than 50% is control of a corporation. Because that's historically been how this act has been interpreted, and that's historically how the courts and other legislation have interpreted control, in fact, more than 50%.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And so, can you clarify if indirect control, what that would include? So, if indirect control would include like a corporation that has a contract with a grower, for instance.
I don't know specifically what the contract with it would depend on what the contract with the grower, I suspect, would state. We're looking at something, for example, if someone is a beneficial owner of shares rather than holds legal title, they would indirectly control those shares. So now under the new amendments, those would be added to their aggregate landholding limits because they are indirect control of the shares.
Right.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So one of the things that I mentioned this to the minister before, the Ontario Information and Privacy Commissioner had put out a white paper on beneficial ownership. And one of the things that they had recommended was that it be a transparent and searchable database in order to kind of identify who has indirect or beneficial ownership in corporations. Do we have that kind of database available here in Prince Edward Island so that it's easily queried to find out who is part of what corporations?
There is a corporate and business registry. I believe it's not under the Department of Agriculture, so I wouldn't know the details. I don't know of anything under the Department of Agriculture and Land specifically.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So one of the interesting things about here in PEI is we do have this legislation, the Lands Protection Act, for which other provinces, other jurisdictions do not have. So when you have, when you tie it directly to ownership, whether it's direct or indirect ownership, we have a big fracture between our land registry and tying that to who, like corporate ownership. Is there any, I guess, plans in order to connect those two so that when you are searching for indirect control or through that corporate registry, that the land registry would also be linked to it? I don't know.
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And that was just one of the things about the beneficial ownership that the Ontario Information and Privacy Commissioner had identified. They were doing it for a very different reason, right? They were doing it for money laundering, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. I mean, but they also don't have this legislation like we do here in land. And the reason why they had said about making it a searchable and easy to use free database was so that you could make those direct linkages so that you don't have all this additional effort to try to identify in the self declaring and that kind of thing. So I would just, I'm going to put that out there, that at some point in time, connecting those two databases would probably be beneficial to take some of the effort out of the workload. Because when IRAC spoke to the standing committee, they did speak to just how onerous the process is in order to identify land ownership, and it is a huge spreadsheet, you know, with a lot of, you would know, a lot of formulas and trying to figure out when you're talking to percentages and that kind of thing. So I think that there is work that we could do there around beneficial ownership. So will records relating to indirect ownership be viewable by the public? Will that be something that's in the current registry?
I think it's something that we're going to look at going forward, land ownership transparency, and I think there's going to have to be, it's definitely something that we've started the conversation on, and we'll probably move forward on it sooner than later. It's going to take some modernization of our technology to put all three together.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thanks, Chair. And thanks for that. So just talking about the registry itself, so the registry is fractured because we have two separate registries now because of basically the Business Corporation Act almost created a new one. And one of the changes that you made based on questions that I'd asked was around adding the shareholders information into the database so that we could see who the shareholders were. And that was done, I think, fairly easily, Minister. It didn't take long to actually update the database and the registry with that information. So have you looked at what that took? Because I do think that that was a fairly quick change that your department, and I do commend your department for doing that because it was done fairly quickly. So actually putting in this additional information, I think would probably, I would like to think it would be the same ease.
And unfortunately, it's not. In our conversations, I think finance, which have the land deeds under finance, their systems would take a lot of improvement to do everything that we want to, but it's something that is on the path forward as we continue to modernize our software systems. It will get easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And so the land piece aside, just the corporate registry, though, updating the corporate registry so that it identifies beneficial owners of that corporation, is that something that we could change fairly quickly? Like that's where I was going with the with the shareholder information being updated fairly quickly.
Okay.
Is that where it could be?
I'm not sure of the ease at all on that, how much it would take.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So this bill repeals Section 11(1) of the Act. Can you explain what this section does and why you're repealing it?
Yeah. Currently, there's a section 11.1 of the Act where if the relevant minister, the minister is satisfied that it's not in a public interest for shareholder information to be disclosed, a aggregate landholding declaration can be provided in its place. So we are proposing that section be repealed for that, and that practice no longer be permitted. So you would have to file your regular statement under section 11.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair, and I would agree. I think that's
It will
a
promote
good update, yeah. So under section 12, under investigations.
Okay.
So the current act, IRAC or the minister department conduct an investigation. So this is being changed so that only IRAC can conduct an investigation, but the minister can direct it to do so. Can you let me know why you're removing the power from the minister to conduct their own investigation or to appoint somebody to conduct that investigation?
It was more so just to streamline the process and provide the resources to IRAC to be the one to conduct these investigations, or to be the one to appoint someone to conduct these investigations. They would probably be the one who would be conducting the investigations anyways.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. Minister, can you walk us through the challenges that you had with Brendel with that? Because I know you requested the investigation, and then there was some, I guess, I'm going to call it a kind of a misunderstanding or just complications because you had requested IRAC to do an investigation, whereas I believe that if IRAC had have done the investigation, then the report would have been public. But because you actually requested that investigation, it's not able to be public, and it's going through this onerous, completely crazy process where Islanders have not seen it yet.
Yeah.
So I'd like to get your perspective on that as to...
It's been a long time.
What's that?
She asked for his perspective.
Yeah, the minister has the floor.
I got it in,
I'm sorry.
I got it in camera.
The minister has the floor. The minister has the floor.
It was frustrating. It was a hot potato that we knew that it could be a public document if IRAC took ownership of it, but unfortunately, because I had to take ownership of it, it had to fall through the FOIP process and the Privacy Act, and it was unfortunate, and it drug it out extra long.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. So if now only IRAC can do the investigations, IRAC didn't do this investigation, right? They didn't actually do this investigation until you told them to do this investigation. Right. So the change in this legislation, what makes you think that IRAC's going to would have done, like if we go back 2 years, if they wouldn't do the investigation at the time and you had to order them to do the investigation, what makes you think that this change in the legislation is going to actually get IRAC to do investigations when we obviously know this one needed to be done? So what makes you think that they're actually going to do it?
Well, I can order them to do it, continue to order them to do it, and I'm not sure they wouldn't have done it on their own beforehand, but as a timely matter, it was ordered from me. So I don't want to speak for IRAC on that situation, but with this, IRAC have the abilities and the expertise. This is their job, and so this puts it onus on them to do it, and but it still gives me the power to order one.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay, thanks, Chair. So did IRAC request this change?
No.
They didn't request it. They were certainly consulted on the bill as a whole, but I don't think they requested this change, no.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. So the new clause states that IRAC can authorize an investigation to be conducted. And sub 2 also states that it allows them to appoint anyone. This begs to question who IRAC would authorize to conduct an investigation. Do you have somebody in mind, or have you had discussions with IRAC on that?
There's been no discussions with IRAC on that particular issue, no.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So how did this wording get changed to what it is if there was no discussion with IRAC as to them authorizing? So would this be the situation where they hired Chief Justice Mitchell to do the, former Chief Justice Mitchell to do the investigation? Is that allowing them to do it, and did they not already have that ability?
It would certainly allow them to do that, to appoint a justice to conduct an investigation. I can't speak to whether or not they already had that ability. The minister has an ability under the current act to appoint any person to conduct the investigation.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. That's correct. He did, but now in the new one, he doesn't, right? It is giving IRAC the ability or the power for the minister to order IRAC to do it. So now it's giving IRAC the ability to appoint somebody to do it, but did they not already? Was there no clarification around that or something that caused that change?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have an answer for it right now. I can bring the answer back. Certainly, yeah.
Mermaid Stratford.
So subsection 3 gives the investigator appointed by IRAC the powers of the commission. So why are these broader powers needed?
It just makes it clear that the investigator will have all of the powers that are under the IRAC Act itself. I don't think that was clear in this particular act before, so we've just made it clear that you have, in addition to the powers under the proposed amendments, you also have the powers under the IRAC Act.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. Was there anything in the Brendel investigation that triggered requiring these broader powers for a commission or investigator?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So under the investigation, so the former Chief Justice Mitchell was hired to do it, or selected to do that investigation. And I think IRAC had all of the, I guess, required, I don't have the word, authority, that's the word I'm looking for, in order to do it. So I'm just wondering what more we're giving in this than what they already had, and who requested this actual change? Like, why do we need this wording in here if they already had all the powers that they had?
I think it's been made very clear in the Act now that we're outlining all of the proper provisions and all of the powers of the Commission. We're just making it very clear that we're linking this back to the IRAC Act, and so there's no issue of what powers the Commission might have under this Act versus the IRAC Act.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thanks, Chair. One of the things about having, one of the things that came up when we had the IRAC into the standing committee was they haven't actually done investigations in an investigation in a long time, right? Like and they weren't being publicly documented on their website, whereas when they did orders and that kind of thing, for a time they had been updated on their website. So when an investigation is now completed by IRAC, how does the public get at knowledge of if the investigation is happening? So if let's say I'm, resident of District 18 and I call in and say, I have concerns. How does that person know if IRAC's actually investigating it or not?
Do you know, Andy?
I don't know what can publicly be disclosed right now. I can bring that information back, yeah.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So let's say I'm resident of District 18, I've called IRAC, I find out, yes, they are doing an investigation. The investigation gets completed. How do I know what the result of that investigation was?
Again, I think we're talking about what can publicly be disclosed, so I can get that information and bring it back.
Mermaid Strafford?
Thanks, Chair. And I'm sorry for not bringing this up before. As we talk things, then I just, questions kind of trigger, and so I know we haven't talked about this in a briefing or anything like that, but I do think that one of the things that was identified through the Brendel investigation was the lack of information to the public. And we know that this is a public interest, a big public interest, right? And I think it's important that it be identified how IRAC, so you're giving IRAC all the power to be able to do the investigations. Yes, you can order it. If you order an investigation by IRAC, does that put us back into the same scenario of where we're at today with the Brendel report, where it would put it right back as a hot potato? And have we clarified that in these amendments? That it's not actually a hot potato, that it is of public interest and a public document.
I can bring, again, it's what can be made public, and I can bring that information back. I don't have that information right now.
Mermaid Strafford, do you have many more questions in this section, or?
No, I can process what I'm thinking now, and you can go to somebody else.
Okay, there's been someone else waiting on the list for a while.
Absolutely.
I'll come back.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you still want, Charlotte Brighton, do you still have a question on this?
I still had a question. I appreciate all the fact that this is retroactive. But I didn't understand why the rental sale is not included in the rec. If I understand your answer, why is it not included as a place where retroactive action has to take place? If you said it was covered by the law.
If there is a contravention of the act, that's separate than, are we talking about the resident person applications for the 400 acres?
I'm sorry, I don't, not quite sure of the details. I'm just wondering, I just heard that it was not covered, so.
I'm not sure. I'd have to know what section, because I would not be covered. I'm sorry, I don't remember saying that something's not covered.
Charlotte Brighton, could you be a little more specific with the question?
Okay, I think the minister stated that the legislations, which I haven't read in detail, I don't pretend to know all the details. He said that a case like the Brendel sale would be caught by the amendments forward that you're forwarding here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if that's the case, why is this particular land sale not? Why doesn't it have to reverse just like other land sales that you're talking about?
Well, it did. We did
It
order
did?
it. Yeah, we ordered divestiture.
Okay.
Charlotte Brighton?
Thank you. That's all.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford?
Sorry, Chair.
No problem.
Okay. Sorry, just getting my ground again. So under the new section 13, orders by minister, mostly it's the same section of the current section 12, just a bit of renumbering, but in subsection 2. So it's good to have subsection 2. Good that orders have to be made public, however, in the manner determined by the minister. I think this is where I'm going back to. That wording, in the manner determined by the minister, that is concerning. So Minister, how would you determine the manner? Like, what options do you have in this section as making it public?
So what, could you give me the section number again, please?
The new section 13,
Orders
under
by the
subsection
minister.
2, order, et cetera, to be made public.
Okay. And what was the question again, sorry?
So the wording, it says, shall be made public in the manner determined by the minister.
Right.
So I'm wondering what options you would have at your disposal to make, like, what would the different manners be?
I guess it depends on the circumstances, but it leaves it pretty wide open there, doesn't it, Andrea, for what I can do?
There would be various methods, yeah.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. And have you discussed it? Like, would it be, would a method be like a newspaper or through a website? Like, to have that wording in the legislation, would that, have you discussed any of those options of how you would make an order public? Just so, if the wording's in there, I would think that you've kind of had this discussion as to what methods you would have.
I guess there's a legal action, is there?
You'd have, yeah, there's no discussion right now, not that I'm aware of, but there would be, as you say, it could be online, it could be posted in a newspaper, it would be a determination at the time by the minister.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay, so why not put something more specific in there?
We could put newspaper in there, but that might not be the best.
Might not be available.
30
10
years, 30 years time, like this act, I hope will last 30 years, so I guess who knows what the media mean will be, I guess. I assume.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay. All right, I'm going to go to the new section 15 under offenses.
Okay.
So this new section, so it puts an offense of up to $250,000 for all offenses. Can you run through what the current fines are for these offenses that you've got listed here?
Under
Are
the
they all
current
same?
act?
Under the current act.
The fine amounts are the same, 250.
Okay.
Yeah.
For everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
not to exceed that amount, yeah.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. And why is there no minimum amount for fines?
It would be at the discretion of the court. These are summary conviction fines, so it's the court would be issuing these. We want to leave it open to the court discretion.
Mermaid Stratford?
That makes sense, thank you. And then Bill 35 raised some of the penalties up to $500,000. So why are you rolling these back to $250,000?
We've kept them at the current limits for some of them. As I say, there was, the administrative penalties have been raised. But again, we focused instead on investigation and order provisions. And we believe that those will be more effective than increasing just the fine amounts and doing nothing else.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay. So I just want to, okay, under new section 15, no, sorry. Yeah, under new section 15.1, it says the administrative monetary penalty.
15.1?
Yeah. Thank you, yes. Okay. I didn't have my decimal. Okay. So how often are these penalties applied?
I wouldn't have that data. It would be imposed by the commission, so they would know, and I wouldn't. We don't have that information.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. Is there some sort of report that the minister gets from IRAC in order to provide that kind of information on some sort of regular basis?
I believe IRAC reports to the Minister of Education. And does a report, but I'm not sure on
You're
that.
right. Yeah.
Mermaid Stratford?
Yes. Yes, reports to the Legislative Assembly through the Minister of Education, you're correct. But I don't think that is something that has been reported on. Is that something that that there could be discussion on as to whether this information is reported on a monthly basis? Or, sorry, an annual basis, because they report annually? Okay, no.
Mermaid
It's
Stratford?
possible, yeah.
Yeah.
Mermaid
I'll-
Stratford?
I'll kind of put that out because that would be good information again for transparency for the public to know. And also, the fine amount was doubled to $20,000. Can you, is that the administrative that you were just talking about? You focused on increasing that?
Yes, and it's so it now matches up with the administrative fines that IRAC can issue under Section 14. We wanted to make sure they were the same and one wasn't lower or higher than the other.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. And I'm curious as to how many times we've charged the administrative fines.
Yeah, that would be a question for IRAC. We don't have that data.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay, thanks, Chair. And then I do want to talk about the divestment and the enforcement of divestment. I don't know where that would fall in section, so. So what happens if, so we've now got the amendment, so what happens if after 5 years, 50% of the land is not divested?
So under the proposed sections 15 and 15.1, that individual or that corporation could be found guilty of an offense under section 15 and or under an administrative penalty under section 15.1.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. What's the process to get us there? Is that a legal proceeding that has to happen?
For an administrative monetary penalty, no, it would be the commission issuing that. For an offense, yes, because there has to be a finding of guilt, so evidence has to be produced to support that.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. And Minister, I know that you had said publicly that you had issued a divestment order on the Brendel land. Can you tell us where that sits currently?
They did divest land, and they are in compliance, I am told.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry. So you said they had to divest land and they're in compliance now? So that land has been divested? Okay.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. Did that have to go through the courts, or was that something that was done on their own?
It was done on their own.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. So when it's divested and they go through that process, there's advertising restrictions that are in the legislation, right, of how somebody has to advertise land, and is that the same process for somebody who's divesting, that they have to follow that, advertising the land and going through that same process?
I'm not sure. I think it is on the going forward.
Yeah, it's not under the new proposed amendments. I'd have to look through the act and I could come back with that answer.
Mermaid Stratford?
Hello, Chair.
So I'm Chair.
I've been here a long time.
Okay.
Shaved.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm just curious now, like going through this, and I'm just about done my questions, but there's a bit of information to come back. How do you anticipate bringing that information back on this bill?
I can bring it back tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Or
Mermaid Stratford?
whenever I get it.
Okay. Yeah, because I would be interested in knowing more than interested in knowing on that clause of divestment, and if they're going to go through that process of how it's going to be advertised and whether it follows that original, how it's advertised in the legislation. I don't have the full piece of legislation with me. I should, but I would be curious on that. So I'm going to go to the proclamation clause, which is section 12. So this act comes into force on a date that may be fixed by proclamation of Lieutenant Governor Council. Why do you need this?
IRAC has identified they need some time because they're going to have to amend the form regulations, and there will also be some slight amendments to the other regulations related to the changes in definition. So there won't possibly be enough time for us to do it before it would receive royal assent in the legislature. So we need some more time to get all of those in order.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. So there's other ways that we could do that, though. We could find out what's the time that it will take in order to get that work done and put a proclamation date in here. Was that considered?
It was considered, but again, we're working with IRAC and in terms of their forms, we'd have to consult with them to make sure that they're on track with that as well. But we need some time, they need some time, and we need some time.
Roommate Strafford.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to go back to Bill 35, which passed in this House in 2019 and has not been proclaimed. If we don't put a proclamation date in there, then how does this get prioritized to get that work done?
I think this will be,
Question.
I didn't hear the minister's answer.
this will be proclaimed
Roommate Strafford.
as soon as possible.
Minister, I agree that, I know that this
We
is a
didn't
priority.
do all this work
I'm
not
just
to
going to
proclaim
simply
this.
point out, in 2019, we sat here in this exact same configuration we talked about Bill 35. We're 2 years since we had that discussion, and it was priority then. So
Well, we've
why
had-
wouldn't we put a proclamation date in here in order to make sure that IRAC gets their work done, the regulations get changed, and then we can actually proclaim this?
It'll be proclaimed by January.
Roommate Strafford.
Thank you, Chair. So like January 1st, is that what 2022 would be here in there? And I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just, I'm making an obvious statement on Bill 35.
Right,
It sat
yeah,
on the
yeah,
books for
well-
almost 2 years.
I mean, we've just come through this report. We got this report. I have to give Andrea kudos. She
Absolutely.
worked very hard on this in a very short, unbelievable timeline to get this to where we are today. And it's, yeah, giving January to get this proclaimed, I think is fair for everyone involved. There's changes in there that'll affect IRAC and it'll affect different people. So it will be enacted in January.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And the way to give kudos to a really excellent employee is to actually get their work proclaimed so that it is law. I'm simply going to say that. I agree. And Andrea, I've said, and I will say it again, I am so thankful that this work has progressed to this point, and I thank you for that.
Carried the bill.
But I am just simply going to say the obvious, that proclamation dates are important. And people that work within departments can do a lot of work, and it never gets completed. It never gets that final stamp. And if you want to reward somebody for saying that they've done a good job, you do that by proclaiming their work. So I think I've asked my question.
Sure. Leader of the Opposition.
You know what? Mermaid Stratford answered all my questions.
Awesome. Great. My list has been exhausted. Shall the bill carry as amended? Okay.
Thank you, Andrea. Let's get this
Thank you,
proclaimed.
What a great picture. That's so good.
Prince Edward Island Lands Protection Act Number 2. Shall it carry?
Carried.
I move the chair.
No.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I move the speaker take the chair and that the chair report. Oh, sorry. I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Okay.
Are we sure?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I move the speaker take the chair and the chair report the bill agreed to with amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Carried.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Prince Edward Island Lands Protection Act Number 2, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill, has agreed to same with amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The honourable member from Morale Donut, Government House Leader. No? The honourable member from Mermaid Strafford and the Opposition House Leader.
First reading, so you ready?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere. We'll get her.
We'll get there. That's okay. You just need to say. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Rental Residential Property Act, and I move, seconded by the honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 122, an act to amend the Rental Residential Property Act, read a first time.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a simple amendment to the Rental Residential Property Act, which will temporarily suspend the clause that allows landlords to evict tenants for the purpose of conducting renovations, also known as renovictions, for a period of 2 years or until replaced by the next piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Election Expenses Act, and I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the same be now received and read first time.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Bill number 121, an act to amend the Election Expenses Act, read a first time.
Overview, Leader.
Thanks, Speaker. This bill amends the Election Act to address 4 separate issues. Firstly, it introduces provisions to regulate loans to political parties, which are currently absent from the Act. PEI is the only province without such provisions. Secondly, it requires political parties to submit annual audited financial information, and again, Prince Edward Island is the only province that currently does not require this. Thirdly, the bill lowers the election expense limit to bring it in line with other provinces. Currently, PEI is more than double the next highest province. And fourthly, the bill allows small anonymous donations of under 25 to be more easily made. This is similar to the cupcake bill, so-called, that was introduced in 2018 by former Speaker Kathleen Casey. Thank you, Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Strafford, the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the 33rd order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Order number 33, Non-Disclosure Agreements Act, Bill number 118, ordered for second reading.
The honourable member from Mermaid Strafford, the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Bill number 118, Non-Disclosure Agreements Act, read a second time.
The honourable member from Mermaid Strafford and the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the committee of the whole House, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the bill to be entitled Non-Disclosure Agreements Act. Request has been made to bring strangers onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good afternoon. Would you both please state your name and position for Hansard?
Sure. I'm Nathan Hood. I'm Senior Policy Advisor to the Official Opposition.
Michelle Patterson, Research and Communications Officer with the Official Opposition.
Good afternoon and welcome. Promoter, would you like to begin with a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Please. So this bill started with a story that grew into actually quite a lot of stories. And while those stories were different, the themes of them were the same. And it started essentially with a story of misconduct, often in the workplace, but not always. And those people were scared. They were alone, they were isolated, and they wanted help. They came forward. They weren't ready to go to the police for reasons that I assume I don't need to explain to this legislature, but if I do, feel free to let me know and I'll say so. So quickly, they were offered a settlement agreement, complete with a non-disclosure. And the terms of it were broad and sweeping. Very regularly, they were not offered legal advice first. They didn't have an opportunity to understand their full rights in all of this. It was a highly traumatic time for the individual. They were extremely stressed, still dealing with trauma, and wanting desperately to move forward. So they sign the agreement and they leave, believing this will allow them to move on. But they quickly discover that the NDA is exactly the thing that prevents them from being able to do so, because they now believe they cannot speak to the police. They cannot speak to their mental health support worker. They can't speak to their doctor. They now believe they can't speak to anyone. And it's incredibly challenging, particularly in a small community, because this person finds themselves constantly in fear of accidentally breaching the terms of their agreement and finding themselves at risk of being sued. So, how did we get here? Non-disclosure agreements originally were meant to protect intellectual property and trade secrets, but they've become pervasive in all kinds of settlement agreements. They show up everywhere. And I think we can all agree that one person's assault isn't another person's intellectual property. So my piece of legislation aims to separate the idea that a settlement agreement has to include non-disclosure provisions. There were settlement agreements that came forward long before NDAs were prevalent, and in places that have moved forward to legislate this, settlement agreements have not been impacted. It still happens. So in the cases of sexual misconduct, harassment, and discrimination, my bill endeavors to make NDAs no longer standard practice. Can they still happen? Absolutely, but only if it is the request of the victim or the survivor. If they are requesting the NDA, they can have it, but they can't be unduly influenced, they can't be pressured into it, and they have to have been given legal advice. They have to have an opportunity to understand the full scope of what it is they're signing, and they need an opportunity to clearly have it spelled out in their agreement who they're always allowed to talk to. So I'm thinking people like victim services. They're always allowed to speak to the police. They would always be allowed to speak to their doctor or the ombudsperson if it was relevant. But essentially, that is the scope of what this bill does. The NDA could still happen if it is the request of the individual who has been impacted, if they have legal advice and they know full well who it is they're always allowed to speak to, except in situations where we could clearly see that there would be a risk to a third party for their health or safety.
Thank you very much for that, Promoter. It is the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, section by section, or open it up as a whole. Okay. So the floor is now open for discussion. Do we have any questions? The Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice, Public Safety, and the Attorney General.
Thank you, and thank you, Member, for bringing this conversation to the forefront. It's definitely a very important conversation that we're having. As I've said from the beginning, anything we can do for victims of harassment and discrimination, it's something we should be doing. Over the past few weeks, I appreciate the member meeting with the officials from the Department of Justice and Public Safety, and I want to thank you for being open to their help and their suggestions and changes that were made thus far, and I appreciate that. As I mentioned before, I support the intent of this bill, and I do have a few questions.
Sure.
But I thought it was very important that I state that I do intend to support this bill.
Okay.
With the understanding that we may make some adjustments to the bill at some point in the future, if we may realize there's some unforeseen challenges that the bill has. So I just want you to be aware of that. Could be coming down the road. But if you don't mind, I'll just ask a few questions.
Please.
Honourable Member, could you just speak up a little bit too, just so others can hear it across the floor?
Certainly, Chair.
Yeah.
Certainly, Chair. Been doing a lot of speaking. My voice is a little coarse here. Human Rights Commission. Have you consulted, and what did they say?
Yeah, I did consult with the Human Rights Commission. I'll back that up, Minister, and just acknowledge that we have had some great conversations with your department, and I have really appreciated the input that we have gotten back. We consulted with a lot of organizations, the Human Rights Commission being one of them, and they gave us a lot of really good feedback, actually. Our original piece of legislation had included some reporting requirements. They gave us the advice that probably that was not going to be the most effective way to get at the root of the problem we were trying to address, so we've incorporated those changes. We had originally included a provision that would have the employer pay for the legal advice that the survivor or victim was seeking, and they had pointed out to us correctly that that could potentially impact the objectivity of the lawyer. Is the lawyer speaking on behalf of the organization that's paying or on behalf of the individual? So we incorporated that feedback. It's really useful. I think every piece of advice or recommendation that they had suggested, we've incorporated, and we've shared the most recent draft. I don't believe we've heard anything back since then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Oh, thank you for that. In Clause 1E, who is a party responsible as defined in the clause? How does a person known if they are a party responsible? Should every islander assume that they could be a part of a party responsible? Or?
So yes, the short answer, every person could potentially be part of a party responsible. It really depends on the context in which you're having the conversation. So let me explain. When we had originally started talking about this, it was mostly in workplaces. And who the party responsible is in a workplace is pretty clear, right? It's the owner or the manager or the corporation itself. But when you start extending it to different situations, it isn't always an owner or a manager that would be the party responsible for the environment. So if we were talking about a school, the party responsible might be the principal in that case, it might be the teacher in that case. It really depends for who is responsible for ensuring that no human rights violations are taking place. And in almost every context I can think of, there is a party who is responsible for ensuring that no human rights violations take place. Who would you make a complaint to within an organization, right? Mm-hmm. Or within a business. But if we're talking about volunteers, the language for that wouldn't be employer-employee. If we're talking about students in schools, the language wouldn't be as plain. So we had actually gotten some advice from your department that party responsible for the environment might be a more succinct way of summing up that there is always a person who's responsible for ensuring human rights violations do not take place, but that person isn't always called by the same title in every environment. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and the Attorney General.
Thank you, Chair. Can you explain how this bill changes the existing common law rule regarding NDAs? What disclosures are permitted under the bill and what permitted under common law? What's the difference?
Yeah, so it's really interesting when you start having these conversations with people, and I definitely have when I would explain some of the situations that people have come forward and shared with me and have those conversations with lawyers, they would say, well, technically, you can't contract someone and prevent them from speaking to the police now. That's already not something you can do. But it's incredibly challenging because people are signing these agreements under duress. They are experiencing the worst day of their lives. They come into a conversation where they're expecting to get help, and they're passed a contract that says you can't speak to anyone about anything within this period. And they believe that to be true. And there are actually so few examples in Canada, I couldn't find any, where an individual has challenged their NDA before the courts to say, is this actually enforceable? Is it as broad as it sounds like it is? There are just no examples of it. Lawyers consistently tell me, would that be upheld? Probably not. It's really hard to imagine that you would uphold a contract that was signed under duress in the first place, where a person doesn't have legal advice, where a person believes they can't speak to the police. So the common law, as it is understood, would already say you could probably do that, but that's assuming people have a really high legal literacy, which they do not have, right? Most people couldn't tell you common law. Now, I can understand that you can ask that question, but not a lot of people would be able to. So this really clarifies what the law should be all the way along, right? We would believe that a victim of sexual assault or rape would be able to go to the police, but that's not clear. So this really clarifies what the four corners are around that for people, and it spells out a list in legislation of people that you could always speak to, besides law enforcement. Like, think if you were experiencing something in the context of government, thank you, that you would have the ability to report to the ombudsperson, or that you would be able to get victim services support, that you would be able to speak to a mental health support worker. Does that answer your question?
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and the Attorney General.
So with that, so if the parties dispute can't agree whether to enter an NDA or not, does this mean the person who experienced the harassment or discrimination needs to pursue a lawsuit or a complaint?
So it's a good question, Minister, and it's important to remember that there's nothing that forces women to sign NDAs now. So if a person doesn't wish to enter into it and the two parties can't come to terms on it now, there's nothing that makes her sign it now. So this doesn't change anything in that respect. But in most circumstances, the person who is proposing a settlement agreement isn't necessarily the perpetrator. It's the person responsible for that environment. So if we use the example of a business, you have someone come forward complaining of sexual misconduct, let's say, in your workplace, and they're not ready to go to the police. So you may be unclear on whether or not you are able to fire that person, and you're not sure what your next steps are, but we know for sure that you as a business owner need to be released from liability. So you want to do everything right. You have followed all the steps possible to provide support for this person, but ultimately, you as the business owner are the one who needs to settle, because otherwise you're at risk of being sued, because there's always someone who's responsible to ensure there's no human rights violations in an environment, right? Mm-hmm. So whether or not the victim agrees to never speak about it ever to anyone ever again, you still need to be released from liability. So when something is off the table in any settlement agreement, whether we're talking about confidentiality clauses or whether we're talking about any divorce or any contract, when something is off the table, it's just off the table. That doesn't end the negotiation. So that's not something I'm worried about.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and the Attorney General.
So, well, that leads me to another question. So why is a limit in section 4(3)(e), why is it limited duration important there? And what is the purpose of that clause, I guess, is a question.
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people believe that NDAs should have some sort of lifespan. Is there really a need to say that you won't speak about this for the rest of your life? Oftentimes, we are talking about releasing an organization from liability. 10 years may be the amount of time under which technically that employee doesn't work there anymore, they've moved on. Is it still mandatory that this person cannot talk to their mother about it? So we had originally wanted a set duration fixed in legislation in the regulations that was set by your office of whatever you deemed to be appropriate, whether you thought that should be 30 years or 20 years or 10 years or 5 years or 2 years. I'm not sure what the correct answer should be. We had originally suggested that should be in regulation. Some of the feedback we got from the department was that they would prefer to not be responsible for coming up with what that timeline is, but we believe that in that negotiating process, in the beginning, both parties involved should talk about what that timeline needs to be. And knowing that that's going to be part of the discussion. It doesn't have to be a fixed amount that we've decided on, but the parties who are involved in negotiating it, if we're going to be moving forward with an NDA, if this person has already gotten legal advice, if they already have a clear picture of who they're allowed to talk to and who they're not allowed to talk to, there should also be a timeline set to it, whether it's 5 years or whether it's 25 years, but so everyone entering into it is in the same understanding.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
So with that, do you think this section might deter parties from settling?
No. No, absolutely not. So having to have it as a timeline that they've set, they get to decide what it is, right? So they might both agree that it's 50 years. They might both agree it's 5 years. But it's so important that we understand there's a big difference between non-disclosure provisions and settlement agreements. They're not the same thing. They've become ubiquitous, but they're not the same thing. We've had settlement agreements forever. Non-disclosure agreements are new. It's only been the last couple of decades that we've been seeing non-disclosure provisions included, and they've become super pervasive. They're everywhere. But people settled prior to having someone silence. So you have to remember, if we go back to that example I had earlier, if you are the business owner, whether or not you can gag someone forever, you still need to be released from liability. So you're still going to want to settle. Whenever we look at other jurisdictions that have legislated these changes, like California, one of the arguments that was originally made about the legislation was from the Chamber of Commerce in California, and they said it will negatively impact the ability for people to settle, and then they will end up having to go before the courts. Now, of course, this has been in place there for multiple years, and that's just never been true. There's no increase in these cases going before the courts. It's the sort of narrative that's common, and we do hear it in pretty well every jurisdiction that's ever contemplated bringing this forward, but it hasn't bore out anywhere that has actually done it, so I'm not worried about that.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
In Section 5, can you explain why this section has been included in the bill?
Yep, absolutely. So, we're saying in Section 3 and in Section 4 that an NDA cannot be created if the person has been coerced into it or hasn't had an opportunity to seek legal advice, doesn't have it isn't in the public's interest. So we've kind of spelled out the corners of what is necessary for an agreement to be in place. Section 5 is saying, and by the way, if you negotiate in bad faith and create an NDA outside of those terms, it's not enforceable. It's the piece that gives teeth to the fact that otherwise, what's to stop someone from still putting pressure on someone? If they know they can't be, if they know it can't be enforced in the future, it's a real good deterrent to not negotiate outside of those terms.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
So what does that mean for Islanders who've already entered an NDA?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is, Section 5 is only referring to new NDAs moving forward. Section 5 has nothing to do with NDAs that already exist. So current NDAs are not null and void.
Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Well, I do have probably a lot more questions, but I think you know you've done your homework on this and you've done a lot of work, and
Good bill.
I'll leave it with that.
Start?
Any further questions, members? Morel-Dona?
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you for bringing this bill forward and for the briefings ahead of time too. I know a number of members of our caucus had questions and you answered them quite well. It's something I didn't honestly realize was happening until it was brought up. It's one of those things that, you know, it doesn't sound like common sense until you hear it, then you can understand the proper reasons why NDAs are there and then also why this bill is coming forward. I appreciate how you've consistently brought it back to looking through the eyes of victims. I think that's an important lens for the legislature as well. And I think it's a good lesson for us too, to be, I've certainly heard it like, well, if we're the first to go, we might make mistakes or something like that too. So I commend you on having the courage to go first, and then if there's problems, whatever, you deal with them. So I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to be educated on it and the work you put into it. Just thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'll just add that the nervousness of going first is certainly something that we have heard only from a minority of people, but I do understand that. And one of the suggestions that we would have is that the Minister of Justice and Attorney General refer this bill, if it passes, to the Uniform Law Conference, because they, as I understand, would be interested in studying this piece of legislation if it is in existence somewhere, and it would be an opportunity to look for potential ways of improving it if there are any potential unintended consequences that could be considered. We did have a lot of lawyers look at it and give us feedback, but we would welcome more. So I hope you do refer it to the Uniform Law Conference. Thank you.
Carry the bill.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry. Just
oh, sorry. Morel-Dona?
I know there's the Premier is trying to be back here for the vote.
Oh, just like that.
We have a good connection.
We don't call that. You were saying?
Shall the bill carry?
Carry. Thanks for your help.
Benefit assistance.
I move the title.
Non-Disclosure Agreements Act. Shall it carry? Shall it carry?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carry. Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
It's a lot of shall it carries, eh? Mr. Speaker, as chair of a committee of the whole House, having had under consideration a bill to be entitled Non-Disclosure Agreements Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Standing vote, please.
Honourable members, a standing vote has been asked. Sergeant at Arms, you may ring the bell.
Opposition is ready for the vote.
Everybody's ready for the vote. Honourable members, are you ready for the vote? All those voting against the bill, please rise. All those voting for the bill, please rise.
The Honourable Minister, Fisheries and Communities, the Honourable Member from Morel-Donau, the Honourable Minister of Finance Deputy Premier, the Honourable Premier, the Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action, the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown-Winslow, the Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir, the Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land and the Minister of Justice and Public Safety, the Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing, and the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, the Honourable Leader of the Third Party, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, the Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot, the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, the Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Brighton, the Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, and the Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Honourable Member, your bill passes unanimously. The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, that the 34th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Order 34, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act, Bill number 119, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Bill number 119, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford and the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, that this House do now resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Now, in a Committee of the Whole House, take into consideration a bill to be entitled an act to amend the Employment Standards Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Would you please state your name and position for Hansard?
Nathan Hood, Senior Policy Advisor to the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much and welcome. Honourable Member, would you like to begin by giving a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So that's a tough act to follow, first of all. I'm very happy to move these amendments to the Employment Standards Act. We're all familiar with the concept of equal pay for equal work. This has been the law in PEI for decades through the Human Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in pay. However, despite these protections, island women and other demographics continue to receive compensation that in many cases is not equal to that of men. In consultations, we also became aware that the gender wage gap on PEI may actually be going in the wrong direction, and that's based on recent statistical reviews. Jurisdictions across the globe are implementing and expanding pay transparency requirements as a way to close the gender pay gap. Through the adoption of pay transparency measures, governments seek to prevent employer practices that disadvantage workers and seek to improve the bargaining power of workers, particularly women and other disadvantaged groups, in negotiating for better wages. The European Commission notes, and this is a quote, "The asymmetry of information between employees and employers about pay may give a negotiating advantage to the employers from hiring time onwards. When employees do not have access to information that would allow them to understand the relative value of their labor, they are unable to negotiate successfully for fair wages. Indirectly, a lack of information of pay levels across organizations, sectors, and regions discourages workers' mobility and contributes to horizontal gender segregation." So this legislation has three primary elements. It prohibits employers from seeking pay history information to prevent incidents where past pay discrimination leads to future pay discrimination. It requires publicly advertised job postings to include salary information, and it prohibits employers from taking reprisals against workers who make inquiries about their pay, disclose their pay to coworkers, or give information about compliance or non-compliance with the Act. In a time when the island is struggling with a labor shortage, I believe this legislation would empower workers and encourage more mobility in the island workforce, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honourable members, is the wish of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, or open it up as a whole, or section by section, or all? Okay. Now open for questions.
Sorry, I will
Sure.
just add that we also have just a quick House amendment, just there was a numbering issue
Okay.
with the bill.
If you would like to read that into Hansard, please.
So Bill 119 is amended by A, the deletion of the words number 4 from the title of the bill on page 3, and B, for greater certainty, by the deletion of the words number 4 from any page headers or other ancillary notes appearing in the form of the bill as introduced.
Thank you very much. Members, a copy of the amendment is being passed. I'll give each of you a moment to receive it, have a look at it, and then I'll open the floor for discussion. Okay, members, all members have received a copy of the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Shall the amendment carry? Okay, discussion is back to the bill as amended. Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Honourable Member, for bringing this bill today. I just have a few questions. I'm curious, did you consult the Human Rights Commission on this bill?
We did not speak with the Human Rights Commission, although we do have a large list of organizations that we did consult with on this bill.
Do you mind reading them? Is it a big list, or can you?
Well, there's a large list that we did reach out to. We did not receive feedback from many of the organizations either way about the bill, to be honest. We had reached out to, we've been in consultation with your department on this, back and forth quite a bit, Minister, as you know, as well as we received support from the PEI Federation of Labor. We had great conversation with the Advisory Council on the Status of Women and made some revisions to our original draft based on that conversation, but they were generally supportive of the bill. As well, the Association des Femmes Acadiennes et Francophones, Action Femme, wrote in support of the bill. And we also spoke with Tina Sakista, who is an academic expert, subject matter expert on the bill, and we made some revisions based on her recommendations as well, and was generally supportive of the bill also. Oh, yes, sorry. And we did get feedback from the Charlottetown Chamber of Commerce, and they were supportive of the pay history requirements and anti-reprisal around discussion or seeking information about pay within the workplace. They did express some concerns about needing to post salary information, the job range, or salary range on a job posting. Because that was the only feedback we received that was had expressed those concerns, we did take it into consideration. But based on the evidence in the wide growing body of literature around pay transparency, to hide information or not disclose information to prospective employees at the outset could contribute to gendered pay inequality. It was the decision that, taking that into consideration, we went ahead with that component of the bill.
Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Chair. Was there any organizations, honourable member, against this bill, and if so, why?
That was the only organization that we heard from this.
Perfect.
And we did, I will say that originally we put out, also put this, the first draft out for public consultation. And through that process, as well as the consultation emails that we had sent, we did make some changes to the bill. One of the original aspects that was in the first draft was around a reporting requirement for larger businesses, and that was based on the pay transparency legislation in Ontario. Based on consultations, as well as the concerns expressed by the Charlottetown Chamber, we did remove that aspect of the legislation at this time. But certainly would encourage the department to look into reporting requirements in the future so that we can ensure that we are making progress when it comes to gender pay inequality.
Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Chair. Over your consultations, is there certain industries that we find I guess, have the most significant pay discrimination? Is there certain industries that you've seen in doing this bill?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question, and that would be part of the reason why reporting requirements would be a wonderful thing to bring in the future. The reason that some of the reasons we chose not to do that this time would be that in the Ontario legislation, they had it at businesses that have 100 employees or more would have regular yearly reporting requirements. So on PEI, the number of businesses that would fall under that category is, of course, much smaller than Ontario. In other jurisdictions across the world, they have that threshold as a much lower number. However, really it requires broader consultation to decide what sort of a size of business would be required to report and what that reporting would look like on PEI. Nate, did you have anything else to add on that?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't have the data at my fingertips, but I know, PEI has one of the smaller wage gaps in PEI or in the country, and it doesn't excuse the existence of a wage gap. We have to work to ensure that one doesn't exist. But I know, for example, that the public sector is actually a big factor in reducing the wage gap because they have achieved somewhat of a level of equal pay for equal work. I think where you will see bigger disparities is perhaps where you'll see more women working, because a lot of those jobs are not well paid. So it can vary from sector to sector for sure.
Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Chair. So in section 5.8, I'm just curious, is there any evidence that in this section will reduce paid discrimination in section 5.8?
So the section that prohibits a prospective employer from asking about a pay history.
Right.
So yes, so in other jurisdictions in the world, they have seen that that actually can contribute because, for example, if you have a worker who has been discriminated in their pay in their previous employment, if they then are forced to disclose what their pay was in a previous job, it increases the likelihood that they will receive the same level of pay, which is again less than what they really should be getting. So yes.
Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess in closing for me, I just want to thank you for, the last 6-8 weeks, I believe, 2 if not 3 times. You worked with the department back and forth, and you were open to making some changes to make the bill stronger. So I certainly support it on my end, and I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Are there any further questions? Shall I carry?
Carry.
I move the title.
An act to amend the Employment Standards Act. Shall I carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall I carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to with amendment.
Shall I carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having on consideration the bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Employment Standards Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same with amendment. I move the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall carry. The honourable member from Morel-Donagh and Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that motion 78 be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Member for Charlottetown Winslow moves, seconded by the member for Montague-Kilmuir, the following motion. Whereas educating our island youth is an important and rewarding task, whereas the success of our school system relies on the efforts of a wide array of staff, especially teachers, educational assistants, school counselors, student well-being teams, school bus drivers, custodial staff, and administrative staff. And whereas the school system has undergone tremendous pressures over the last 2 years, including the global-19 pandemic. And whereas Prince Edward Island's school system has been fortunate to weather the global pandemic with a minimum of disruption compared to other jurisdictions through a blend of in-person and online learning. And whereas none of this would be possible without the dedicated efforts of school staff. Therefore be it resolved that this Assembly acknowledge the tremendous contribution made by individuals who work in our school system to improve the educational and social outcomes of island youth.
Who's the mover? The honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today to move this motion, thanking our educational staff. Of course, I think the timing couldn't be better with the annual PEI Teachers Convention just wrapping up. Every day of the week across PEI, Mr. Speaker, dedicated men and women work to help educate our students in safety and support. We've often heard the phrase, Mr. Speaker, that it takes an army for our schools to run smoothly. Teachers, educational assistants, bus drivers, administrative staff, student well-being teams, and custodial staff, and hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone. These folks give it their all to help our students, to give them a solid foundation for the future learning and the development of our students. Running schools can be a challenge, Mr. Speaker, even on a good day. Now, during the last 2 years, those challenges have taken on an entirely new scale thanks to the global COVID-19 pandemic. The challenges posed by the COVID pandemic have created disruption in the school systems across the world, with many jurisdictions having seen their schools closed for weeks and months at a stretch due to the larger public lockdowns or school outbreaks. Here on PEI, we have been very fortunate to have met with the challenge of COVID with the fewer disruptions compared to other jurisdictions. And Mr. Speaker, it seems strange, but I was talking with some constituents the other night, and my son Harrison, who is in grade 2 at West Royalty Elementary, has never had a normal year of school. You'll remember that in kindergarten. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately the pandemic hit, and unfortunately the end of the school year was disrupted, with the final of that year being done with in-home learning or online learning. And then, of course, with grade 1, he's been in a situation where the school year wasn't the exact same with the cohorts. And now this year, of course, with West Royalty Elementary having the outbreak at the onset of the school year, missing a school year, wearing masks. So again, a lot of these island students, and that's just a personal example, Mr. Speaker. There are numerous examples of students across this island who have had this year disrupted. Now, that's the student side of it. The teaching side of it is a completely different beast, Mr. Speaker, because these teachers go to school every day with the job of trying to educate our youth, trying to teach them things that they might not understand or might not know. And then they've also had this added COVID-19 where they have to deal with the cohorts, and they have to explain to the students, no, you got to wear your mask when you're walking to the or outside the school. And they have to teach them these things, and they have to use words that they're not used to using themselves, like cohorts. They're not used to using words like PCR tests, et cetera, et cetera. The school staff have been challenged to respond with this whole new set of issues, but they have done an amazing job of this. It has not been easy. We've had some recent incidents this school year. I do want to make note of the event there where the bus went off the road, was hit by another thing, because, Mr. Speaker, it was many of the teachers from the Cornwall group of schools that were some of the first on site to, first of all, to comfort the children that were there, and to also, make sure that everyone was safe. And it was also the teaching staff that were the ones who were waiting back at the school for the other students who were waiting to come to be like, what's going on? How come my school bus hasn't arrived? And so I just want to make a special mention to those teachers and the staff that, that put in that extra time during the day. Also, the recent events at Charlottetown Rural, and then, of course, as mentioned, the outbreak recently at West Royalty Elementary, and going back to last June, the incident at East Wilshire Intermediate School. Mr. Speaker, these teachers and educational staff, right through the entire buildings of our various schools across PEI, they put in so much time and effort every single day, and it's not just, Mr. Speaker, when that first buzzer goes to start the school day, and not when that final buzzer ends the day. Teachers are going back. They're trying to think of better ways to make sure that their students learn a different outcome the next day. Some in this house might know and might not know, but my mother was my school teacher for the first 8 grades. I was homeschooled. And so, of course, I do have a special place in my heart for educational staff. I guarantee you, and my father was the principal, so it was even tougher, you know what I mean? But anyway, I do know that every single member inside this legislature, Mr. Speaker, they have that favorite teacher that, you know, maybe inspired them when they were in grade 1 or grade 2, or if you ever have a conversation with a group of teachers, they can always go back and say, you know, I was inspired to become a teacher, to get into the teaching profession because of this teacher that I had, who taught me not only, you know, 2 + 2 or whatever, but they taught me to be a better person. And again, these things, like with COVID, it's just been such, I know that everybody has their own personal connection or personal story with COVID, and it'll be one of those things, Mr. Speaker, where you say, oh yeah, I remember, you know, when they first announced, when Dr. Morrison and the Premier went on and said that, you know, we're experiencing something that we've never experienced before. There's no playbook for this. And everyone is going to have those stories. And, you know, our students are going to have them, but the teachers are also going to have them. And I just think of the resiliency of the teaching staff that, and again, I'll use, just because my students went there in West Royalty Elementary, like, all of the teachers, when the pandemic hit, and they couldn't be in the classroom with their students, were doing Zoom meetings. They were making phone calls, checking up on their students to check to see. They were making videos, Mr. Speaker. The gym teachers at various schools were making videos to make sure that their students, their kids were being active across PEI. I know the member from Charlottetown West Royalty was very, very promotive of that, being active. But those were the things that the teachers didn't have to do, but they did, because they knew that the students were their top priority. Mr. Speaker, one other example I'm going to mention is, again, that was part of it, but there is that in-person being able to see your teacher, even wave to your teacher. And when the onset of the pandemic happened, you know, that wasn't available. And I know that teachers in various schools in and around Charlottetown, for sure, organized parades through the streets. And, you know, all the students in the various streets in Charlottetown, all the various schools, you know, they knew that their teacher was going to be driving by at such and such a time, and, you know, they could get out and the teachers were wave. Again, you know, social distancing at the time didn't permit that one-on-one with the students. But again, it has been an incredibly tough time for not only students, but for the teaching and all the staff. And of course, that goes on to the cleaning staffs, the custodial staff at schools. You know, they've had to increase because, of course, with the extra sanitation that goes along with COVID. You know, I just want to say that the past 2 years, with the school staff, they've shown that they have these deep wells of caring and compassion that they draw from. And it is supporting our students. And our students are going to be those future teachers, the future lawmakers, the future lawyers, future doctors. And I do think, Mr. Speaker, that, you know, that the way that all of the educational staff across PEI have responded, it deserves our thanks, our appreciation, and our gratitude. And sharing that gratitude was one of the main reasons for bringing this motion forward for debate, as a way to acknowledge the valued school staff. And again, of course, I do have a personal connection. My wife is a school teacher, but I do see that, and I hear these conversations all the time. I hear them all the time, Mr. Speaker. When you're, especially, you know, being a hockey coach involved with a lot of young children, and you know, talking to the parents who are teachers, and I just wanted to bring this motion forward again. The timing, I don't think, couldn't be any better after just wrapping up the PEI Teachers Convention. Talking to a few teachers, Mr. Speaker, they felt that the convention was good because it gave them that kind of rejuvenation to be able to go back and, you know, they're trying new things that they didn't think when they were going to teaching college, or if they're going to UPEI for their bachelor's of education, that, oh yeah, by the way, 3 or 4 years from now when you're teaching, you're going to have to do it in an online learning environment, or you're going to have to be doing ALPs, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all things that they have welcomed and not shown any disappointment in being able to adapt to that. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I am sure that there will be other members that want to speak in this motion, so I will conclude my remarks, and I do look forward to hearing the other remarks from the other members. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Montague, Kilmore, and the government whip.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the mover for the motion. It was kind of a recap there of the pandemic times, I guess, in the school system. I think we sometimes undervalue the amount of work and effort that the teachers and staff put in, and a lot of the time it goes above and beyond simply just teaching our students, but it also, our teachers are there to support students with their mental health, other concerns they have, their worries, and what happens in their daily lives. I know at Montague High School, for example, not only were teachers teaching our students, but they were trying to find housing for some students that didn't have a place to live. Even a student that was, I think in some cases, living just outside the school grounds, homeless. So these are, teachers take these things personally. They care an extreme amount for their students, and they want to ensure that they succeed, and not just in the classroom, but in life in general. And I think when we do think back, we think of our teachers and how they supported us in those ways, and we don't necessarily remember how to do maybe the math or whatnot, but the teacher that was always quite helpful outside of the classroom, and made you feel welcome, and you always looked forward going to school every day, and it was, in most cases for a lot of students, that's where students feel at home. That's where perhaps they get to go to school, and they're leaving a situation at home, and that's where they feel safe. And that's only for a part of the day, though, right? So I want to thank the teachers. I won't speak at length, and I know we're nearly out of time, but thank the teachers for the exceptional work that they do. Not simply just teaching the academics, which they did an extraordinary job during the pandemic to make sure that we could catch students up to a place where they could be comfortable with to move on to the next grade level.
Oh, yeah.
But
Honorable members, the hour has been called. The Honorable member from Morel, Donna, and the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance, that this House adjourn until Wednesday, November 17th at 1 o'clock in the PM.
Shall it carry?